they can give you a perspective that, you know, is going to be more specific than what I may talk about. And so that's super helpful. So here he is right now. So, so don't be shy. Okay, so before, I guess one thing I want to mention too, you have the agenda. So we are going to take a break at 10:15. So those of you on Zoom, you'll know that too. We'll take a break so everybody can look forward to that. Those of you in the room get nice pastries. Those of you on Zoom will have to go check your fridge. But all right, so let's talk about getting to know NIH. So for any time you're approaching a new funding agency, one that you're not familiar with, the most important thing is to really get to know that agency, and every agency is different. So if you're used to going to Department of Education, NIH is totally different. If you're used to going to National Science Foundation, NIH is totally different. The way they do things, what they fund, the language you use, all of that is different. So I think I emphasize that because that is a common mistake a lot of times faculty will make, is they are very comfortable with one agency, and they just assume that if they go to a different agency, it's going to be the same thing. And it isn't. It's really like, you know German, now you need to learn Portuguese, right? It's going to be a different language and a different culture. Okay, so NIH stands for National Institutes of Health, okay? They are composed of 27 different institutes and centers, okay? So those are almost like their own funding agencies. They have different priorities, they have sometimes different processes, they have very different budgets, they have different ways of doing things. So one of the first things you have to figure out is which institute or center you want to apply to, okay? And so those are a lot of times the shorthand for institutes and centers it's a mouthful, so we say ICs. So you'll say, oh, which IC are you going to? And that stands for institutes and centers, okay? NIH is the primary federal agency for conducting basic, clinical, and translational medical research, okay? We're going to come back to this link. They have a link to organizational charts for each IC. So that's really helpful. So we're going to talk about how to figure out which IC you should be focusing on for a particular project. And then once you figure that out, you want to really dig in and get to know that institute, okay? And so we'll talk about how to do that. And so as part of this, you depending on your project, you may have one IC, or you may have different ICs depending on the project you're focusing on. So many times you talk to a researcher that's doing research, and they might apply to one institute for one particular kind of project and to a different institute for a different project. But each time they go to a different institute, they have to get to know that institute, okay? So what are these institutes? These institutes are organized in general by disease, by part of the body, by population, like patient population, by technology. So that's typical, okay? So National Cancer Institute, right? Disease. National Eye Institute, part of the body. National Institute on Aging and National Institute for Child Health Development. Those are, population. National Institute of Biomedical Imaging, okay? That is National Human Genome Research Institute. Those are more on technology, right? So and there are many more. And so this link at the bottom, it will take you to all of them. But I wanted to show you just really quickly going back, okay? So if we click on this, I think this is really helpful to kind of see, okay? So if this link takes you to the organization charts for each of these, okay? And so let's say I'm interested in National Institute for Child Health Development. If I click on that, okay, that takes me to an org chart, okay? And now this is interactive, and so if I look for Division of Extramural Research. So the extramural means that's where they fund people outside of NIH. They have intramural research, where those are the people who are actually employed by NIH to do research. But most of what NIH funds is extramural research, okay? So then I can click on that, okay? And that takes me to the organization. So here I can see Division of Extramural Research, and then I can see Child Development and Behavior Branch, okay? If I click on that, it tells me what they fund, right? What they're interested in, what they do. I can look at Population Dynamics Branch, okay? It tells me. So this is a, kind of a nice little way to at least get a high level view of a particular institute. Say, I think that maybe this is where I want to go. This is a nice tool. I just kind of want to make sure that, because sometimes when you see an org chart, you go, yeah, I'm not really interested. But this actually tells you a lot more than just who is the director and so forth. Okay. Another thing I want to kind of emphasize here is not all institutes and centers are funded equally. Okay. So this is a few years old, but this is an NIH slide, which I think is super interesting. Okay, so what the size of the circles is the size of the budget for that institute. Okay, so you can see National Cancer Institute, huge. Okay, National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Disease, huge. National Institute for Nursing Research, NINR, tiny, right? Well, does that mean that if you have something that, you know, a project in mind that would be appropriate for nursing research, you shouldn't apply to NINR? No, because what happens is, you know, the applications follow the money. So National Cancer Institute is going to get a whole lot more applications than NINR will, right? But the big thing you always want to keep in mind, and this is true within, you know, in this situation where you have a number of institutes within a big agency or even between agencies, is that when you have a funding unit, you know, somebody who has a budget and that they're giving out in grants, right? And they are very limited, okay, in the amount of money they have compared to maybe a sister unit, right? They are going to be very, very protective of that budget, okay? So if you are looking at NINR, National Institute of Nursing Research, okay, and you put a project in that's not exactly in their mission, exactly what they want to fund, that maybe you're doing something that could also apply to cancer, they're going to look at that and they're going, no, you go to National Cancer Institute, they've got way more money. Okay, so you really have to make sure that you are really right in the middle of what that particular institute is focusing on. If you are in a situation where you're looking at these institutes with smaller budgets, okay? And, you know, that makes sense from their point of view. They want to fund things that no other institute would fund because they have a limited amount of money. So this is sort of a way to kind of back up my argument that you really have to understand your institute, understand what their focus is, okay? And obviously the scope of what NCI is going to fund is going to be a lot larger than the focus of what NINR is going to fund. Same, you know, National Institute for Minority Health Disparities. See, their budget's pretty small, okay? So they're going to be very focused. So you got to make sure you understand what they're interested in and you make the arguments in your proposal that make it really clear you're right in the middle of their priorities. Okay, and that means you got to know their priorities. And I guess I should point this out too, for any of you who have, for example, thinking about going to National Science Foundation or National Institutes of Health, same issue. NIH's budget is like a huge, and NSF's is smaller, right? So same thing, NSF is very protective. If it looks like it should be an NIH proposal, the NSF will tell you that. Yes?
We have a question in the chat. Can you give offhand, I guess, any ICs that are relevant for like psychology, educational psychology?
Oh yeah, there's, you know, it just depends on your population, and we will talk more about that. But national, you know, if you're talking about children, National Institute for Child Health Development. If you're talking about older people, National Institute for Aging. If you're talking about minority issues, National Institute for Minority Health Disparities. So it really will depend on your project. And we will talk more about how you figure this out. So this is going to be a part of our exercise, is to find your institute and find your program officer. So hang in there, we'll get there. All right, so though you have the institutes, okay, and there's a link here to their strategic plans. Then there's also NIH-wide initiatives, right? So there are some health, you know, challenges that are, you know, kind of relevant to a whole lot of different institutes. So for example, obesity is one where it affects the heart, it causes, you know, cancer, it affects older people, it affects children. So it can go in a lot of these different institutes and centers. And so they have kind of a cross-cutting funding for that. And you can find more about the strategic plans. There's a link here to those, and the programs that they have that they're supporting right now that are out of the Common Fund, which are for high risk, high reward research that's relevant to more than one institute or center. Okay, so what does NIH fund? Okay, they fund research that enhances health, that extends healthy lives. Okay, so not just disease focused, right? Healthy lives. Reduces the burdens of illness and disability. Okay, and that can include basic biological mechanisms that have health implications. So really fundamental biology. National Institute for General Medicine is usually the one, NIGMS. Okay, they are the ones that tend to fund the really fundamental stuff. Disease-related research, obviously National Cancer Institute, National Institute for Allergy, Infectious Diseases, behavioral and social science research. But remember, you know, you're doing education research, you're doing behavioral psychology, that kind of stuff. It still needs to be relevant to health and healthy lives. Okay, so you still have that underlying, you know, impact and it has to be applicable to those issues. Okay, research on tools and methods. So for example, imaging, you know, kinds of things, bioinformatics, things like that, and clinical trials. They also fund fellowships for students at pre-doctoral, postdoctoral, and so forth, training programs for students, shared instruments, so to buy an instrument that will be shared among researchers that are funded by NIH, and even construction. So they will, you know, like funding to build out a lab, that kind of thing. One thing that's really different about NIH than, for example, if you're used to National Science Foundation, is that it has sort of a parallel system in that you put a proposal in, and what happens is it will go to the Center for Scientific Review most of the time. Sometimes it will be reviewed by the Institute, but most of the time it will go for the Center for Scientific Review, which is separate from the institutes. Okay, it's a separate organization within NIH. Then it will go to the Scientific Review Officer, okay, who is assigned to your app, and they assign your application to a study section. Okay, so the Scientific Review Officer is a scientist, and they will look at your proposal and they will say, this should go to this study section. The study section is a panel. It's a standing panel that basically persists over a number of years. People do rotate in and out, but it's pretty much the same people. And they are organized by scientific area, not by institute, not by, you know, other things. It's just expertise, right? And then that study section will review your application. They will assign a score, like, you know, an impact score. So how meritorious is your project based on the science. And then the ones that score well will then go to the institute or center that's most likely to want to fund you, okay, based on what the impacts are, right? And what their priorities are. And then they decide from those applications that got good scores, which ones they want to fund based on their priorities. Okay, so that means you've got two audiences, right? You have got that study section, and which is your peers, okay? And then you have the institute or center. So National Cancer Institute, National Institute for Allergies and Infectious Diseases, National Institute for Aging, right? So those are two different audiences. And the big thing here that's different from a lot of other agencies is you can actually request which study section and which institute you want, okay? Now, they don't have to follow your request, but a lot of times they do. So that means, you know, you really get to know who your audience is. And you can look up who's on the study section. Well, I'll show you how to do that in a little bit, okay? So most other agencies, it's all kind of anonymous. You have no idea who your reviewers are. Not so with NIH. You can say, I think this should go to this particular study section, and I think this should go to this particular institute and center. Now, you don't have to do that. You can just throw it in there and let the scientific review officer decide, but that means you're writing your proposal without knowing who your audience is, right? So it's much better to do your research, right? And that's a lot of what I'm going to talk about over the next hour is how do you figure out which study section, which institute, which program officer you should be talking to, and who should you ask, you know, request in your application. All right, so more kind of terminology for NIH. Okay, so NIH has a number of types of grants. Okay, these are almost like flavors of grants. Okay, they're not specific funding opportunities, but types of grants. Okay, and they're actually in the parlance of NIH, they're called activity codes. You would think it would be called grant mechanisms, and they do have mechanisms. That's a different thing, right? So when you're looking on, and some of the tools I'm going to show you, they're going to ask you, they'll have a little place where you can select activity code. That is where you want to put in, I want this particular kind of grant is what I want to search for, okay? So the big meat and potatoes grant is the RO1, okay? So that's called a research project grant. And that's 5 years, and then we'll talk more about this. RO3s are small grants. They have other ones, R13s are for conferences, R21s are for exploratory, and so forth. Okay, so R stands for research. Okay, and these are all links to more details on each one, but I'm going to just quickly go through the big ones. So RO1s usually up to 5 years. The length of your your narrative, the part of where you describe what you're going to do, varies by the type of grant. So that's a 12 pages for the RO1. And then they have, typically, the amount they fund varies depending on the kind of project if you're proposing. But if you're asking for more than $500,000 per year, you have to get okay from the staff. One big thing for NIH is when they talk about dollar amounts, they are usually talking about direct costs. So they're not including your overhead, which is really different from most other agencies where usually it's everything. So that's why a lot of people are very interested in NIH, because the funding rates or the funding amounts are actually quite a lot higher. All right, and usually they expect a lot of preliminary data for the RO1s. Okay, RO3s are like little small sort of feasibility kind of grants, only 6 pages for the research strategy section. R15s, I don't think you guys are eligible for R15s because this is for institutions that don't get much NIH funding, and so you're probably not eligible, but you may have a collaborator who is, so just want to mention that one. R21s are exploratory developmental research grants, so these are kind of the more, hey, I'm beginning this, I have great, kind of high risk, high payoff idea, but I don't have a whole lot of preliminary data yet. You're not required to have any preliminary data officially, but for most of these, your competitors will have some preliminary data, some evidence that this has a prayer of working, but it is, kind of more of a sort of exploratory, early in the process kind of grant. There are also a whole bunch of other ones, and again, I gave you a link to all of them so you can look at these. But again, these are just types of grants. So SEPA is a Science Education Partnership Awards. Those are R25s. Those are for more educational activities related to STEM education that will, help nurture the future workforce in biomedical, behavioral, and clinical research. Okay. Planning grants, these are R34s. These are generally in kind of preparation for full-scale clinical trials. Okay, this one I just want to mention really quickly, the MIRA. So this is kind of a different model, okay? It's called Maximizing Investigators Research Award, okay? And what that is this is a kind of a experiment that the National Institute of General Medicine, NIGMS, that does a really fundamental biological work, is trying, where you don't have to define a specific project. You're just talking about the type of research you're going to do and what you have done so far, where you see yourself going, and they will fund your lab over 5 years versus funding a specific project. So I'm not, this probably is not very relevant for most of you, because most of you are probably not going to go to NIGMS. This may spread, this model may spread. The big thing, the reason I want to mention it is because a lot of what I say about having, of defining a project, having very clear aims and clear outcomes and all that sort of stuff that's really important for all these other kinds of grants, doesn't apply here, right? So it's a whole different thing. It's much more about your long-term research trajectory. So just in case you run up against it, that's what this is, okay? There are also a number of other grants that are sort of on the high risk, high reward kind of grant mechanisms. And this one is the NIH Director's New Innovator Award. Is called a DP2, okay? And this is, again, sort of to fund people for a kind of a line of research versus a particular project. And again, they don't require specific aims, all the stuff I'm going to be talking about. Just mentioning these, they're very competitive. They only give maybe 70 awards a year, really high bar here. But I just want to mention those because these are kind of exceptions to most of what I'll say after this in terms of planning your project and so forth, because again, they are a new model where they're really just looking at your kind of line of research. Okay. And there are a number of other programs out of this high risk, high reward program, Pioneer, Early Independence Awards. The only thing about these is they are really, really competitive. Okay, so beyond the R's, and I didn't go through all the R's, but those are the big ones that you'll probably run up against. They're T for training, K for career grants. Okay, career, we'll talk about it in a minute. The reason it's K is because C is for construction, so K is the career. F is fellowship. P is program project grants, which are like centers. Okay, like several RO1s all together under an umbrella with a lot of coordination. Okay, and then so forth. So if you want to know all the different activity codes, there's this link here. I'll give you all that. All right, so for K awards, these are not the same. If you are familiar with NSF career, this is totally different. These are much more developmental, like career development awards, where you have people who are transitioning or need to develop a new expertise to add to what they're doing. And so a lot of these are called mentored research scientist awards. So they are, kind of where you bring in a mentor who will then help you in this transition. Okay, so I won't go into tons of detail here on that. Is anybody here interested in a K award? Okay, so just so you know, there's a lot of resources online for those. Okay, this is for fellowships for students, a whole lot of different ones. They have a lot of information here. There's a link to that page. And then this is just, again, kind of about the K award. This is an NIH slide, which I think is really helpful to show kind of where the different types of K awards apply depending on where you are in your career. Okay, so they also have the Office of Research Infrastructure program. So that includes comparative medicine. These training and K awards are all under that, and the purchase of instruments and so forth. Okay. And they have the NIH Office of Behavioral and Social Sciences Research. Okay, so that can be super helpful to those of you, particularly if you're doing mixed methods research and trying to figure out how do you frame that for NIH, because NIH is known for being, much more on the quantitative side, but they do fund mixed methods, okay? But they have particular ways they want you to frame it. So if you are in that situation, and just doing behavioral and social science research, there's a lot of good resources here. And the OpNet here is, they actually post funding opportunities that might be relevant to you. Across NIH, and then they have resources here that might be helpful to you. So I would say if you're in that situation and I know many of you probably are doing behavioral and social science research, check that out for sure. Okay, so those are the activity codes. So those are types of grants. Okay, so now let's talk about funding opportunities. So how do they actually announce a specific opportunity that you can apply for? Okay. There are different types of funding opportunities, and so let's talk about that, okay? So there are program announcements, and with any funder, you have to learn all the acronyms, so those are called PAs and PARs, okay? So PARs are typically reviewed within the institute, okay? And program announcements are relative, they're focused in that we want to see proposals that do the A and B, right? But they tend to be over maybe 4 or 5 years. They're somewhat broad, okay? But they're a little bit directed, okay? Research funding announcements are RFAs, okay? RFAs are much more specific. We want projects that do A, that do B, that do C, that D, and so forth. And a lot of times they will come and go really fast, right? Okay, this is due due next April, and then boom, that's it, right? The program announcements are active usually for several years, as I said earlier. So this is a much more focused. This is exactly what we want, and we have money for it. Okay, so if you do have, if you see an RFA and you go, boy, that's exactly what I do, that's wonderful, right? They have money, they want to see that, your project, right? But you don't have to force fit your idea into an RFA or even a PA, right? Because they also have parent announcements. So parent announcements are just a mechanism to accept investigator-initiated proposals, okay? So that means they want your idea. So the RFAs and PAs are more a top-down process. Hey, we're NIH, we want to fund these particular kinds of projects. The parent announcements are a bottom-up. hey, community, we want your best ideas. Okay. Now you have to do a lot of research to figure out what is it they're going to be interested in funding. Is your idea really fundable? Who should you be talking to? All that kind of stuff. But it is really open. They're not telling you at all what to propose. Okay. They have review criteria and so forth about the quality of the science, the impact, and so forth. But it's up to you. And, NIH has sort of vacillated over the years for, they were mainly investigator-initiated proposals. Then they got more and more prescriptive for a while, and they've kind of gone back. I think they decided that they weren't getting as good of proposals when they were being too top-down. So they've kind of moved back. And so typically, if you're looking at the number of grants, not the amounts, but the number of grants, you're talking about maybe 60 to 80% of research projects are in response to parent announcements. They're investigator-initiated grants. So that's really important for you to know, because a lot of times people who are new to NIH, they think they have to find a program announcement or an RFA that fits exactly what they want to do. And it's true, if you see that National Institute for Child Health Development has a PA in your area, that is a strong indicator that they are interested in the kind of research you're proposing. But it doesn't have to be that doesn't have to be an active PA or an RFA in order for you to put a proposal in. All right. Okay. And for they have different mechanisms and dates for the parent announcements, and most of the program announcements are the standard dates, which I'll talk about more. Okay. All right. So if you're looking at a funding opportunity, okay, I'm going to just kind of state all these, and then I'm going to give you some examples. Okay. First, make sure if it's an RFA or PA, has it expired? All right. So they're only active for a certain amount of time. PAs for much longer than RFA. But are they active? Because sometimes you can kind of find one, get all excited, and then go, oh no, it expired, right? So has it expired? Who's eligible? What are they trying to accomplish? Right? Does that align with what you have in mind for your project? What institutes and centers support it? Okay, so different, if there are a lot of times there may be more than one institute or center that will support a particular funding opportunity. They're putting money into it. Okay, if you don't see an institute that is interested in the kind of research you do, probably that's not a good fit for you. If you do see an institute where you think, oh yeah, what they're funding is really what I do, then that's a good sign. Okay, which activity code is an R01, is an R03, is an R21. A lot of times you may find one that's an R01. You're like, oh, I'm not ready for an R01. That's a big project, 5 years, a lot of preliminary data. I'd really rather put in an R21. Well, a lot of times there may be a sister related funding opportunity that is the R21 for the same topic. So I'll show you where to look for that. Okay. How will it be reviewed? Are there any special review criteria? So they have their standard NIH review criteria, which we'll go over, but particularly RFAs may have extra ones. Okay, so you have to look for that. What's their motivation? Okay, and has it been competed before? So this is particularly true for, obviously, for the parent announcements. You can look and see what's been funded in your particular topic. But for program announcements that are active for 5 years, usually, unless it's just been announced, they have funded things. And out of this parent announcement, you can look out of some program announcement, PA, and you can look that up and see, well, what have they funded? This is a good sign. If it's something somewhat like what I'm doing, it's exactly what I want to do. That's not good, right? But this is part of understanding a particular program funding opportunity. And obviously, when does it due? Okay. All right, so on top of this, there is a new, well, not new anymore, but in the last few years, a policy for clinical trials where they tell you in that funding announcement, the PA, the RFA, the parent announcement, whether or not you're allowed to propose a clinical trial, okay? The reason for that is just basically administrative, because they have extra review criteria for clinical trials, and it changes how you write your proposal and the forms you have to submit, right? So often they will have one version with no clinical trial, the other one with one, or clinical trials optional. But you just want to make sure that you're finding the right funding opportunity and you're applying to the right one that fits your situation, okay? All right, the big thing though is you have to understand what constitutes a clinical trial. For those of you in behavioral research, it's a little dicey because they define it as one or more human subjects are prospectively assigned to one or more interventions, which may include placebo or other control, to evaluate the effects of those interventions on health-related biomedical or behavioral outcomes. That sounds like experimental behavioral science, right? So you can accidentally do a clinical trial, because most of us think of a clinical trial as being huge, right? But you can have one or more subjects, right? So just be aware of that. If you're worried that you might accidentally be doing a clinical trial, talk to your program officer, talk to your research development officers here, just to make sure that you understand whether or not you need to, be looking for a funding opportunity that allows a clinical trial. And then obviously you have to fill out additional forms. You have to address the additional review criteria. All right, those investigator-initiated grants. So it's wonderful. You can come up with any idea you want and propose it. Doesn't mean they're going to fund it though, right? It's wonderful to have all this freedom, but with freedom comes responsibility, right? You've got to figure out, is what you're doing something that the particular funder you're targeting is going to be interested in? So actually you have to do a lot more research. They're not going to tell you that. It's up to you to do your research, okay? And that means figuring out which institute or center is going to be interested, what's your fit with their mission, what are their research interests, okay? And so you can do that. There's a lot of information online about each institute, about each program, each branch within the institute, each program. You can look at what else they've funded. You can look at what PAs and RFAs they've issued, again, so that they put money in those areas. So that can help you determine that. And then the most important thing is to contact the program officer, okay? So that is really, I think one of the key things you should take away from this is don't be shy about contacting the program officer. We'll talk more about that. It's good if you can kind of develop your specific aims page before you do that, but make sure to contact them. And they may say, no, we don't fund that. You need to go over there. If they say that, that's good, right? That spared you all this effort of putting in a proposal that had no chance, right, of being funded. And it told you, oh no, I need to go to this other institute, right? Or I need to change the way I'm framing this, or I need to add something to this because clearly this doesn't fit what they're looking for. So it is important, just because it's investigator initiated, just because you can propose anything doesn't mean that everything is going to be competitive, okay? And of course, you may need to bring in collaborators, consultants to be competitive, and we'll talk more about that. All right, and then I said already, you apply for those investigator-initiated grants, apply through the parent announcement. That is kind of just an administrative mechanism to apply. All right, due dates. As mentioned earlier, there are standard due dates. RFAs a lot of times have their own due dates, but if they say standard due dates on a funding opportunity, this is what they are. Okay, so basically for the different activity codes, they have different due dates, but they're always 3 times a year. So it's wonderful. I mean, it's not like NSF or a department, Institute of Education Sciences and Department of Education, where you have to wait a year till the next time you apply. These, they pretty much anytime you're ready, there's going to be a deadline coming up. Okay, so for RO1s, if it's a new application, meaning it's the first time you put in a proposal on that particular idea project, then it's February 5th, June 5th, October 5th, every year. For RO3s and R21s, it's similar, but it's the 16th, and so forth. Okay, and this link here will tell you for all the different activity codes. I'm just giving you the most common ones. Okay, now that's new, which is also, again, more language, and it's called an AO1, right? That's a new application, first time you put it in. For NIH, you can put a proposal in. It can be reviewed, declined, which unfortunately is the common experience, right? First time you put in an idea, a lot of times you don't think of certain things, right? The reviewers will decline it. They will write your reviews. Okay, you'll get the reviews back. You can then revise your application, addressing the review comments, right? And put it back in as a resubmission. Okay, the resubmission is called an AO2 proposal. Okay, it has an extra page where you're responding to your review comments, and then you can change the rest of your proposal to address those things, right? And they have their own due dates. Okay, so again, 3 times a year, March, July, November. Okay, and then if that doesn't get funded, then you have to really overhaul your project. You've had 2 chances at bat. They want you to come back and change, make some significant changes, and it'll go back in as an AO1 as a new one. If you are doing AIDS-related research, then they have their own due dates, and again, that's in that link up on the top. All right, so let me show you some examples. Okay, so let's look at a PA. And I'm going to make this, see if I can make this big enough so everybody can see it. All right. Okay, so this is a program announcement, right? First thing you see is the institutes and centers participating. Okay, National Institute of Mental Health, the National Institute of Child Health Development, National Institute of Deafness and Other Communication Disorders, National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, National Institute of Neurological Disorder and Stroke. So you can look and see which ones, are there particular ones that would be where your research would fit. Clearly, if you're doing research on hearing impairment and autism, maybe that would be a good fit for you, right? They're supporting that. Okay. So the title of this funding opportunity is Research on Autism Spectrum Disorders, R01, okay, so 5-year grant, clinical trial optional. Okay, so you can have a clinical trial, you don't have to. Okay, so now let's look down here. Okay, it says R01. This is a reissue. Okay, so that means, you can see up the top here, I should probably, for those on Zoom, I need to probably be doing this on the screen. Okay, reissue, meaning this was competed before. You can look and see what was funded before here, right? You can see too, this one was issued in 2021, so this one also has a number of projects you can look at that have already been funded. Okay, that gives you, now look at this, companion funding opportunity. They fund R03s out of this, so those are those little pilot grants, and they're funding R21s, which are the exploratory grants. Okay, they have their own PAs, so you would have to respond, you would be applying to those PAs, but they're on the same topic. So that's great. If you're saying, well, I'm not ready for an R1, an R21 would be better for me, or I want a little bitty, I want to just do a little pilot project, R03. So again, that tells you now, that's not always the case. Sometimes it's just an R01 or just an R21. Okay. All right, and then down here, you can see, okay, what's their purpose, right? And they tell you, this is what we're trying to do. You want to make sure that what you're proposing applies. Here are the application due dates. The ones with asterisks are those standard dates we already talked about. Okay. Expiration date, March 6, 2024. Okay, so that's a good thing to know. You don't know if they're going to reissue it, so you may want to jump on this. Even though I said, things come around 3 times a year, this is only going to be active till next March. Okay, and then all this other information. Okay, so all this description of what they're looking for, what this program is about, what's behind it, probably stuff that is relevant to one of the institutes or another. Okay, and they go into a lot more detail about what they're interested in. Okay, and eligibility. Usually you're eligible if you are at a university, but you want to double check that. Okay, and then they talk more about all the requirements. Okay, so what they're looking for, and the different forms and so forth. Most of this part is kind of boilerplate. Okay, but again, you want to make sure that you check the review criteria. These are the standard review criteria, which we will talk about later. Significance, investigator, innovation, and approach. Okay, and they're describing more detail how they interpret those. This is relatively standard language, but sometimes you will see they'll have extra stuff that's relevant. How do we approach, what are we specifically looking for in this approach, in this context? So you do want to make sure you read all that. Okay, so all of this, so here they have additional review criteria, but this is all kind of standard stuff. Okay, So all of this is, it seems like a whole lot to read, but you can very quickly pick out these things we were just asking, looking, okay, is it even active? Am I eligible? When's it due? Is there a companion funding opportunity? So you can actually, once you start doing this, you can really see pretty quickly, is this a good fit for me or not? Okay. All right, RFAs, just as a quick another example, right? This one, you can see much more specific. Only one institute is supporting it, National Institute on Aging. If you're not doing research on, on the aging population or related to aging, doesn't matter how much you think this applies, it's not going to, you're not going to get funded, right? So you have to make sure that what you're proposing fits in with NIE, right? Now, pretty obvious from the title here, elucidating variability of physiological and functional responses to exercise training in older adults. Okay, so that that makes sense. NIH would be supporting that. R01 clinical trial required. Okay, so that's interesting. And do they have a companion one where they don't require a clinical trial? We'd have to find that out. Okay, this is very specific. Again, RFAs are much more prescriptive. Okay, they have a very specific things they want you to do here. They give you, they talk about the opening date was October 3rd, 2023. Okay, and due dates November 3rd. Right, so very quick, right? And so this was posted on August 9th. Okay, so, and we have no idea if they're going to reissue it or what, right? So again, very specific, short term, and they have a very clear idea, all this background here about what they're looking for, right? Be sure and read this, right? They're referring to studies, they're referring to priorities. They even had a workshop. April 2022, NIH convened a workshop, okay, entitled Understanding Heterogeneity of Responses to and Optimizing Clinical Efficacy of Exercise Training in Older Adults. There's a link to it. What do you think is the first thing you need to do? Read that article, read that publication. Okay, so again, you can see when you're looking, if you're responding an RFA, you really have to make sure you understand what's motivating this, you understand what they're looking for, because they have very specific ideas of what they want. Okay, and then read through all that. Okay, and let's see if they have anything else of relevance. Down at the bottom, there is under the review criteria, they have additional review criteria, which is not surprising, right? They're more specific, and I think it's, let me see if I can find it here. So this is the standard stuff. In significance in an investigator innovation approach, okay? And then they have specific to this. Now, this is kind of a new acronym they're using. It's a generic acronym, Notice of Funding Opportunity, NOFO. So you're saying all the federal agencies are using that now. NOFO as a kind of a umbrella term, RFAs, PAs, all that stuff is under, it are all NOFOs, okay? So, and then they talk about what there's, other specific things they're looking for, just relevant to this one. Okay, and then the parent announcement. Okay, this one is R21s. Now look at who is supporting that. Not all the institutes are supporting. So not all institutes fund R21s. R21s are those exploratory grants, right? High risk, high reward. Notice National Institute of General Medicine, NIGMS, does not fund those. Okay, so again, even though this is a parent announcement, that whole activity code is not funded by some of the institutes. So again, look to see if the institute that you're targeting will support R21s and investigator initiated R21s. Okay, and then most of this other stuff is just generic, right? Because they're just saying, they're not telling you this is what we want. They're saying, hey, you tell us what you want to do. Okay, so it's a very different kind of funding opportunity. Does anybody have any questions? I know this is a lot, just kind of want to go. I know some of you probably already know all this, but I want to make sure everybody kind of is on the same page here. Okay. Yes. So the question, for those of you on Zoom, so the question was, how much are RFAs directed to specific investigators? So I don't think in general, these are, sometimes you call that wired For NIH, I think that doesn't happen that often, but they are looking for specific capacities, and there may be a small group of investigators or institutions that have that capacity depending on the funding opportunity. So for some of them, they may say, we want you to use some big database and some certain tool. Well, maybe only Johns Hopkins, MIT, and Caltech have that. Well, obviously, that's going to seem kind of wired. Now, when you're talking about, there are other kinds of grants. So U grants, which are kind of more collaborative agreements. Some of these other ones that may be more tailored to, again, in specific situations where they're looking for some medical school with a specific capacity. But in general, RFAs, PAs, and parent, they are competitive, but there are these review criteria, and you have to look at and see, what those are. Also, you can a lot of times, see what has been funded in the past again, and see, how many they're funding, and that will give you an idea of how competitive it will be. All right, study sections. I was mentioning peer review. Okay, so for most applications, RFAs generally are reviewed within the institute and center, not by study sections, because not by within the Center for Scientific Review, because they are very specific, right, to what that particular institute wants. Sometimes they'll have special emphasis panels that the Center for Scientific Review will oversee, but in general, you're going to be looking for a study section that's sort of going to be your home, that probably will review most of your proposals. So you have to figure out who those people will be. Okay, the Scientific Review Officer will assign those, as I mentioned earlier. And the big thing is you can find study section rosters. Okay, so let me show you how to do that. Now, the good thing about the study sections is they stay pretty much the same. The bad thing about study sections is they stay pretty much the same, right? Depending on what kind of reviews you're getting. So this is part of, kind of figuring out. Sometimes you apply somewhere and boy, they just didn't get what I said at all. In which case, maybe you need to request a different study section. Sometimes you're overruled by your scientific review officer, and you have to go back to them and talk to them about why that was. So there are a lot of, things that you may have to negotiate here, but in general, okay, if you go to chartered study section, so that's from the link in the slides, okay, you can see these are all scientific areas. So arthritis, connective tissue, and skin study section, aging, injury, musculoskeletal, and rheumatic disorders study section, and so forth. So you can see that this is not necessarily tied to any particular funding opportunity. It's not tied to a particular institute or center. It's tied to scientific expertise. Okay, and that's what they are. That's what they're equipped to judge, is how scientifically meritorious your idea is. Okay, so for example, let's say we were looking at adult psychopathology and disorders of aging study section. Okay, I can click on that. All right, here's my scientific review officer. They're very, transparent about all this, okay? Benjamin Shapiro is going to be a scientist, right? And this person is going to read your application, look at, and apply, and particularly the specific aims page and your, your narrative part, your kind of their high level narrative, okay? And then assign and decide, does this fit this particular study section? Okay, and then here you can look at who's on your panel. Okay, so it shows the names. Okay, the chairperson, the number to the right is the year they rotate off. So this chairperson is going to rotate off in 2025. Okay, this person, Dr. Taylor, is in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at Vanderbilt. Okay, and then you can go through and look and see who these other people are. You can look and see what they've published. You can see what departments they're in, right? So let's say you are in, you're in social work, right? Or sociology. Well, there's no sociologists in this study section. Does this really fit you, right? Probably not. So a lot of this will help you determine, is this a good fit? If you are seeing that most of the people here are in departments you're not in, you may think, you know what? Maybe I just need to bring in a collaborator with that, with that expertise who can help me write it in, they can contribute expertise in this field, but also help me write in the right language. So there are a lot of ways to deal with this, But if you're looking, you're like, boy, I don't know any of these people. I don't publish where they publish. I never see them at conferences. Maybe this is not the right place for you. Maybe you want to back up and look at it under study section. Okay. So you do want you want them to be your peers, right? Who are reviewing your proposal. If they're not at all in the same, kind of in the same peer network as you are in professionally and in disciplinary terms, probably not the right place for you. But this is huge. And I think, sometimes people who are new to NIH don't realize that they can do all this. You can ask for study section. You can look and see who's going to review your proposal. You don't have to do that, but you're really giving up a huge tool if you don't do that kind of research. Okay, so let's talk about finding your funding home at NIH. Okay, so I've been talking about the importance of doing this, and now let's talk about how you do it. Okay, obviously you can talk to your colleagues, talk to your peers, to find out if where they've been funded, right? Which institute, which program officer they've been talking to. But if you're starting from scratch, or you'd like to kind of cast a wider net, or you don't have colleagues who are right in your area, the best tool you can use is NIH Reporter. Okay, so if you are familiar with NIH Reporter and haven't been on it for a while, go back. They keep, adding capabilities. It's really cool. All right. So NIH Reporter is basically a database of all the funded grants. Okay, and it's very highly searchable in lots of different ways. So that means you can find out all kinds of information. I'll show you how to do that. And then I'm going to ask you to do that. Okay. You can find your institute. You can find your program officer. You can find your study section. You can look at what else has been funded in response to a particular program announcement or RFA. You can do all kinds of stuff. You can look for colleagues at Texas A&M who have been funded out of a particular institute, right? It also includes, in addition to NIH grants, includes CDC grants, AHRQ, Agency for Healthcare Research Quality, HRSA, FDA, ACF, which is Children and Family, Agency for Children and Families, that's what it is, VA, Veterans Administration. So all those grants are on here, so not just NIH. All right, and in addition, now there's also NIH Report, okay, which is kind of the umbrella. So you can actually find Reporter under Report. I'm going to give you the link just to Reporter, but that also has all kinds of other information, like what are the funding rates, but how National Institute for Child Health Development, how RO1s, what percentage of those did they fund last year, that kind of stuff. You can look all that up using their funding rate tool. They also have funded projects by disease category. So I think this is really cool. Let me just show you that real quick. Another way to look. So again, so much information, you just got to find it. Okay. So here you can see for each fiscal year, okay, what has been, how much money was, for example, put into back pain. Okay. And then you can click and find those projects. Okay. So here are all the projects funded that related to back pain. Pretty cool, right? So, and you can, and then you can also look at, how the amounts have changed over the years and so forth. They also have like strategic plans, roadmaps and so forth. And so all that is, really helpful. Okay. So let's go back and I'm going to show you how to do NIH Reporter. All right. And then just as a warning, I'm going to ask you to do the same thing. All right. So this is, if you're not, if you don't have the link in front of you, just Google NIH Reporter query page. Okay. And that will take, otherwise they'll take you to Report, which is the bigger portal, and it's harder to find Reporter there. Okay. So this takes me to the query page. Now, what I want to do is go down here where it says click to view all search fields. Okay. That sometimes you don't realize that that's there. It's kind of hidden. Okay. Now here, this means I can search all of NIH. I can search everything based on keywords. I can say, I only want to look for RO1s. I only want to look for, things that were funded out of this particular institute. I can do all kinds of things. Okay. But let's say I want to look at, I just want to use keywords at the moment. Okay. So I can, let's say I'm doing research on hip function and exercise, like how, for older people, right? Exercise, hip function. Okay, so I'm going to look at that. I'm just putting in those keywords. Let's see what I get. Okay, I'm not restricted to R01s. I'm not doing any of that. I'm just going to just search on everything to start off with. And, I'm going to get a lot of stuff. Okay, and then I can go through, and this is all stuff that has been funded by different institutes. It has all kinds of different stuff. I can see what type of grant it is really quickly by looking over here, this number here, R33, R21, R01, right here. And then I can just scan through. I kind of like to do that, just scanning through, but I'll show you how you can see things at a higher level in a minute, okay? So let's say, ooh, this looks like, let's see, some of this. Let's see, all right. Let's look, incorporating nutrition, best education, and strength training in bone health, okay? All right, I can read this summary. Does that look like, what I do? Okay, if it does, you can see it, they've highlighted my keywords, right? I can go down here, all right? This tells me program official, Lyndon Joseph, okay? This is National Institute of Aging, was where this person is. This is the PI, obviously, okay? And this was the Aging Systems and Geriatric Study section. So I can then look and see who was on there, and I can take that study section, go back to the query page and look at what else they have, it's been funded that was reviewed by them. So I can see kind of what sort of things are they, obviously they're giving good reviews to, right? This is in response to a program announcement. This particular one, PA 18345, I could look and see what else is funded in response to that program announcement. That's an older one, 2018, may not be active. I can look at that one. I can look to see if maybe there's a newer one, right? If it's expired, or I can see if it's expired. Okay, once I figure out, okay, this is my program officer, Lyndon Johnson, or this is one I think, not Lyndon Johnson, Lyndon Joseph. Oh, that's right. He's gonna be our one. That's right. Oh, great. Okay, so then he's already on. Oh, wonderful. Okay. So basically I can see what else that, has been funded by Dr. Joseph. I can see all kinds of stuff here. So this will help me to start to understand, kind of map out this particular part of NIH. And then I can go to NIA and look up, more information about what their priorities are. I can see what, what things they're interested in. Okay. Now, in addition to that, all right, I can go to, for a higher level view, charts, okay, and I can see what has been funded by institute and center. So NIA, and what they can see they've funded a lot of projects here, but NIAMS, and in the VA, NCI, and SEHD, and I can click on each of those, okay? So all of this is a kind of a really powerful way to figure out where you fit, right? Who is your audience? Who would be interested in doing what, in funding what you're doing? The other thing you can do, if you go back to the query page, is you can actually, let's see, let me go back here. You can actually use Matchmaker, which is right here, okay? And Matchmaker, you actually just put in an abstract from a recent publication that's on the topic that you want to write your proposal on. You can put in your specific games. You can put in just a description, right? So maybe you don't know, your keywords are just giving you way too many results. You can just write, I am doing research and right, and it uses artificial intelligence to find projects that fit, right? So again, very cool. So there are all kinds of things the ways that you can figure out where you are. You probably fit, and see also, has somebody already done what or I've been funded to do what you want to propose? That's something you want to know too. So this is all part of understanding your part of NIH, okay? Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay, if after doing all that, you're still not quite sure, talk to your program officer, right? So you obviously will have at least have identified some potential program officers. Write up your project, and we'll talk more about specific aims and so forth. And then talk to them. Is this the right fit? Is this something you're interested in? What do you think? Is this ready for an R01? Should it be an R03? Should it be an R21? Whatever, right? Which study section do you think I should be applying to? I'm thinking about this study section. Is that the right one? They will give you, their advice on that. And the program officers are really helpful. They are really open to being contacted. And especially if you're new to NIH, they're very helpful. And you want to do your research so you're not asking them basic questions that you can find on the website. But once you're to the point where you really think you have figured out a potential homes, this is a good time to talk to them. Okay. And they will a lot of times read your specific aims page and give you feedback. So that's super helpful. Okay, so now I have an exercise for you. I'd like you to go to Reporter and see if you can figure out where, which institute and center you want to apply to, which program officer. If you already know that, look at what has been funded recently, maybe through, is it being overseen by that program officer, get some more information about what's going on, or maybe look for other places that you might want to apply to. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, I'm going to just give you about 5 minutes to play around. I know that's not enough time, but just about 5 minutes so you can just kind of try it out. Is there any question online? Okay. I wondered who that was. You have one more minute. Okay, time's up. Does anybody have any questions? How many of you found a specific institute that you think is a good fit for you? Anybody? Still working on it? Okay. So if you're, struggling, remember too, you can, if you know you have a colleague who's been funded by NIH, you can look up from, their name, SPI, and look at where they were funded from. There are a lot of different ways to kind of approach it. Also, someone was asking about, sample proposals. So there are some sample proposals that are posted. National Institute for Allergies and Infectious Diseases has those, and I have some of them actually on the flash drive here. But those are not necessarily relevant to your field. So if you can, it's really helpful to look at proposals in your field that have been successful with NIH. The best way to do that, you can talk to your research and development people, see if they know somebody who's been funded. But the other way to do that is when you're looking at a report, look for people you know, right? So if you see someone has been funded, particularly if it was a few years ago, they may be willing to share their successful proposal with you, okay? If it's someone who is a colleague, somebody you know it from conference, somebody who was, went to grad school with you, somebody who, your former advisor, any of that, that's a good way to just kind of get a few examples of your field. Like, how do you write an NIH proposal in your field to this particular institute, okay? So that can be a way to do it also. Generally, though, there are not a whole lot of, you're going to have to kind of do a little bit of your own networking to get those examples that are relevant to your specific field. Any questions? Okay. All right. So talking to your program officer, and we have a program officer who's going to be talking on the panel coming up. So I'm sure he'll have more advice for you on this. But the way most people do it that's really effective, I think, for both sides, right? So it's most efficient, is to develop a draft of your specific aims page. Okay, and we will talk more about writing that specific aims page, but this is a nice overview of the whole project. What are your hypotheses? What are your main specific aims? What's going to come out of it, right? All those things all in one page. Okay, then email that to the program officer with a request. Can you talk to them? Tell them when you're available, arrange a Zoom or a phone call, right? And then let them give you feedback. You can ask them questions, but remember, you're not trying to sell your project to the program officer. They're not the ones who are going to be the first reviewers. It's going to be your study section, right? So this is about getting advice. Okay, so a lot of times they can tell you how to improve your aims. You didn't talk about a target. You didn't talk about X. Where's your hypothesis? Your hypothesis needs to be more specific. This particular thing doesn't fit with what we do. That's the kind of advice that can be super helpful to you. Whenever you write a specific aims page, usually you're going to have to rewrite it. You want to go through, and you're going to be talking to a lot of people, and that's going to be really important to get those, kind of refined in a way that they're really well structured, and they serve as a foundation for the rest of your proposal. So this is one big part of that. They can also advise you on things like study section. So big thing, don't spend the whole time talking, right? This is not you selling your project to this program officer. This is about you getting advice and having a conversation. So you want to make sure, sometimes this is a common mistake people make when talking to program officers, is that they they're nervous, or they're, again, think they're selling their project, and they don't allow the program officer any room to actually ask any questions or give any advice. And so remember, when you're talking, you're not learning. So you do want to be, maybe even practice describing your project concisely, and then leaving room for the program officer to give you feedback and ask you questions. All right, so there is also the new and early investigator status. So those are two different things, right? But you can, if you are a new investigator, meaning you've never gotten a significant grant from NIH, so that means, R03s, R15s, R21s don't count. So R01s is kind of the big ones, right? So then you're a new investigator, right? If you are within 10 years of your terminal research degree, then you are an early stage investigator. And for many of these new and early stage investigators, many of the institutes will allow you to not have quite as good a score and still get funded. So that's something to keep in mind also. Okay, any questions before we start talking about planning your project? So I think it's really helpful, rather than jumping into just writing, it's a good idea to kind of plan out your project at the high level, really figure out what are you trying to do, all those things, develop your project story before you start writing, and that will make it much easier for you to actually write your proposal. And so that's what we're going to talk about next. Okay. First thing to do, though, before you really even start writing, as you're planning your project, is to recruit people who will read your proposal, who know NIH, people in your field who understand what NIH is looking for and are grumpy, right? That's who you want, right? You don't want somebody to read and go, oh, it looks pretty good to me, right? You want somebody to say, page 3, I see that you didn't talk about X, right? That's what you want. You want, because you never want the first people to read your proposal to be your reviewers, right? You want people who are going to give you that sort of feedback and allow you time to fix it. It's very hard to write a proposal that's really good if you don't get feedback. It's usually a question of iterating. So see if you can recruit some folks who'd be willing to do that for you. And that a lot of times means reaching out to people who already have been funded by NIH. And that's part of kind of developing your network. All right. Now, let's talk about planning your project. Okay, so you have your topic, you've identified a funding opportunity in, an R01, a PA that's an R01 or an R15 or an R21 or whatever, right? Okay, now you got to translate it into a project that fits that particular funding opportunity, right? So is it 5 years it's an R01, 2 or 3 years it's R21, so forth, right? Okay. So then you have to define what your project goal is, what you're going to get done, how are you going to do it, what the scope is going to be. Do you have the background? Do you need to generate more preliminary data? That's all part of planning your project before you start writing. All that's the stuff. And, this will take time. So, you may not be ready to put a proposal in for a couple of years, but this is how, a lot of times people say, well, how much time do I need to allot to write a proposal? Well, this project planning stage can go on for a long time, right? You may be thinking, okay, I have this great idea, but I need to do some experiments to show XYZ. I need to do a pilot study to show I can do this, right? That's all part of developing your proposal. You're moving forward, even if you're not putting the proposal in the next, in October. As you're thinking about your project, really think about where are you on the spectrum of really fundamental research versus more kind of providing intervention, and look at what the fit is with the particular funder you're talking to, right? The institute, the program, the funding opportunity you're responding to. So fundamental research is, generally basic science. So you're looking at, fundamental questions, gaps in knowledge in your field, not just what happens, but why. Okay. So if you were, for example, a cognitive psychologist, it's really fundamental what's going on in the brain when you're learning, that kind of stuff, right? Usually there's some sort of theoretical framework and the product is new knowledge. Okay. So that's kind of on that fundamental side. Okay. And this is really a spectrum, but I'm kind of artificially putting this into 3 buckets. Okay. And then you have kind of moving more to the more applied side. We're talking about translational research, preclinical research where you're not just looking at fundamental gap in your field, like we don't understand how this thing works in our brains, but how can we make something happen, right? How can we treat this particular issue? How can we, address this therapy? How can we make a therapy better, right? So this is a lot of times we're focused on gaps in capability or performance, right? This is not working well. How can we make it better? We need to, this particular outcome, right? And so a lot of times this is sort of building on fundamental results, right? We have learned these cells do X, Y, these neurons do this, these muscle fibers do that. Now we want to use that to, develop a new therapy, to develop an intervention, to test a new tool, right? So a lot of times this is going to be much more about performance targets, much more about, having a particular measurable improvement on something, right? That's a different kind of project than the fundamental one, and different parts of NIH are going to be interested. NIGMS, National Institute of General Medicine, is much more on the really fundamental side. Some of the other programs may be much more applied. So this is something just to keep in mind for a specific funding opportunity. What are they looking for? What outcomes are they looking for? Is it just, having a new paper, that addresses a gap in your field, or are they going to want you to demonstrate some the efficacy of some particular approach, or develop, answer specific questions about how the performance of a particular therapy, right? So that's going to be a different kind of project. And then you have the more intervention kind of, like we have an intervention we want to provide it to somebody, so to a population. So we, we have want to achieve a desired outcome based on particular need, right? And we need resources to do that. So I want to provide therapy to a group, children in a, in an underserved neighborhood who had this particular health challenge, right? Now, the thing about this is a lot of times I run into faculty who are really kind of on this end, and it just depends on your field, right? But you're like, okay, I have this new exercise program. I want to provide it to these kids. That's a lot of times not NIH, right? If you are not doing research, you have to really, you're going to need to push it more towards what are you trying to find out, okay? That may be other parts of Department of Health and Human Services, but if it's just framed as providing an intervention that's already developed, that's probably not going to be NIH. Might be foundation, might be other places. So again, remember, NIH is about research, except there are programmatic grants. So those are more, for example, training grants, right? So we need funding to train a bunch of our PhD students in XYZ, that kind of stuff. We need funding to buy an instrument, right? Those are things, that's not research. So there is some of that, but you do want to be careful if you are way on this, more on this kind of side of the spectrum where you're very applied, your project may be really good, but if there's not a clear research agenda, then a lot of times you're moving away from what NIH wants to fund. So you want to be aware of that. Is anybody kind of in that situation where they're thinking they're maybe too applied for NIH? All right, so with that caveat, all right, so let's talk about your project story. So this is just kind of training wheels, and you may vary, this is just a way to get started thinking about how you want to frame your project. Okay, so a lot of times you can think about it as, okay, what's the need or motivation? And then how does that tie to a specific project goal? Okay, based on gaps in knowledge, gaps in capability. Based on that, what is the new knowledge or capability you have to address or have to develop, right? So for fundamental research, we're talking hypotheses or research questions. Much of what NIH funds is going to be focused on hypotheses and research questions. What hypotheses are you going to test? What research questions? And I'll give you examples in a little bit. Okay, sometimes it's more on challenges you're going to overcome. So you want to develop a new imaging system, you want to develop a new kind of tissue scaffolding, whatever, then it may be challenges because it's more applied, again, depending on the funding opportunity, right? Then based on that, you have an approach with specific aims. What are the main things that you're going to accomplish to test those hypotheses, answer those research questions? And those are based on specific methods. And then your significance. What are the outcomes and impacts going to be, right? So if you can write just a few sentences on each of these, right? That can be a nice start for your specific aims page. And you may not, you may not do it in this order exactly. It can vary depending on what's important and what you want to emphasize. But this is a good way for you to kind of start at that high level and be able to kind of develop a kind of a map to your whole project, right? Before you start getting in the weeds, because what you don't want to do, and this is really typical, is people will start with writing the motivation, a literature review, all that kind of stuff, and they will get so into the weeds writing all that stuff that it's not clear what they're actually going to do with their project, right? Because that's easy to write, right? This is, obesity is a big problem. We have, so-and-so did this with obesity, so-and-so did that, and this so-and-so did, and now you've got this draft that's 7 pages long and you haven't even decided what you're going to do, right? Or you haven't articulated it. Rather than doing that, before you start writing, see if you can, again, provide that high level. What are you going to do? What are you going to learn? How are you going to do it? What's going to come out of it? Okay, so let's step through these things. Oh, actually, and then for programmatic or interventions, this is different. These are much more applied, not really research, in which case it's much more about, you have a particular need you're trying to address, but by bringing resources to it. So for example, training students, that kind of stuff. And you have a strategy for doing that based on some evidence, and you have a framework, and then you have an approach. Okay, so let's step through this. Okay, so your goals and objectives. Okay, so first of all, a lot of times people will want to articulate some sort of long-term goal. Where do you see yourself, this line of research going in the long term? This is a lot of times part of kind of painting the picture of why this is important, right? So how does this connect to an important outcome? Okay, so for example, we want to identify social factors underlying primary care utilization among people with serious mental illness. Okay, that's pretty broad, but this is the line of research. Now we're going to have a specific project goal, but this is kind of the big picture. Okay, develop an integrated package of highly predictive biological adherence measures. Okay, find diagnostic and treatment approaches that address the structure and mechanics of multicellular biofilm infections. Okay, so again, that's this is where our research is going. Okay, so when you're thinking about it, okay, over the next 10, 15 years, 20 years, this is the big question I'm trying to answer, the big need I'm trying to address. Okay, and then this, I've already done this kind of a work, my preliminary work, and then this is what I'm proposing to do. If you give me money, I'm going to do this project, and it's going to have its clear outcomes, right? So it's not just a step along this larger thing, but in the context of this larger line of research, this is how this is going to be a significant advancement. And so this helps you make the argument, hey, look, I'm the right person to do this because I'm building on preliminary work, and this is going to have a larger outcome than just what I can do in this 3 or 5 year project, because it will be a significant advancement towards future work and then long-term goal. This is especially important if you're, for example, proposing an R03 and R21. Those are kind of pilot projects or exploratory research. They are meant to lead to something, the next thing. So this will help you paint the picture, not only, okay, you're going to give me this smaller amount of money for this pilot project, but this is where it's going to position me now for that next step, which will be, for example, an R01. Okay. So when you're thinking about that project goal for so we were talking about long-term goal is the big green arrow. Now the project goal is, how will the world be different after I've completed this project? So NIH, after I spend your money, this is how the world's going to be different. Okay, you want to be able to articulate that. What are we going to know? What are we going to be able to do that we don't know or can't do now? Okay, so a common mistake people make is really confusing that big green arrow with their project goal, right? So they might say, oh, the goal of this project is to identify weight loss strategies that minimize bone loss and subsequent fracture in overweight and obese older adults. Okay, are you really going to be able to do that in one project? That's pretty broad. Okay, instead, what do you want to say is the goal of this project is to directly compare the effects of exercise modality during weight loss on changes in bone mass, bone density, and other measures of bone quality and so forth, right? That's what you're actually going to accomplish. So you can say the long-term goal is to identify weight loss, but you don't want to state that as your project goal, okay? Because you're going to be judged by the bar you set. So be very specific. What is going to come out of this project? And then how does that fit into that larger goal? Okay, so example. Our goal is to assess the impact of hip external rotation exercises on pelvic floor strength and function, specifically targeting older women with urinary incontinence. Okay, so again, very specific. This is what we will learn. Examine whether language deficits in young children with autism spectrum disorder are linked to atypical domain general prediction process. Okay. Test whether enhanced positive mind, strong bodies intervention is acceptable in community-based organizations, community clinics. Okay. So again, this is what, making it really clear. This is what we will accomplish. That's really very, very powerful for a reviewer. And you would be surprised how many times you can read through pages and never quite figure out what they're trying to accomplish, right? Because they, a lot of times people want to talk for pages, right? But you need to be able to summarize it concisely in 1 or 2 sentences, right? And that's something to kind of think about as you're planning your project. Can you say, how's the world going to be different after I'm done? Okay. If it's for a pilot or exploratory project, as I said before, your goal a lot of times will talk not just about what you're going to do here, but then how that sets you up for the next step. Okay. All right. And then this is another example of that. Okay. So the, talking about the longer term goal and then where and how that fits into what we're doing. So what I would say a lot of times is, a helpful thing if you're kind of trying to figure this out is to find a partner, your colleague, your spouse, a friend, somebody at the bar, your mom, whatever, right? And just explain to them, okay, this is what my goal is, right? My long-term goal, this is the project goal, this is why I'm doing this, this is the gap in knowledge or capability I'm trying to address, right? If you can explain that, just, a lot of times if we had longer time, I would have you do an exercise where it's like for 5 minutes, you have to explain to a partner and then write it down in one sentence, okay? That's a good way to start to, again, kind of refine your idea into a project you can describe to a program officer and a project that you can write up. Okay, so what you don't, you need to be clear and concise. Don't go on and on and on. Make it really easy for that reviewer to understand what you're trying to do. Then you can fill in the details, but you don't want to make them read through pages of text to try and figure out what you're proposing to do. Hypotheses, okay, new knowledge and capabilities the next thing. This is really key, okay? So this is what reviewers really, because this is this is how the new knowledge in their field, right? This is what researchers and scientists care about, right? So you want to be able to make sure that these are really well formulated. Okay. All right, one thing, when you're thinking about your project, if you are proposing what I call descriptive research, okay, if I do this, what happens? How big, how many, how irregular, whatever is something, okay? That's where you end up with that. This is descriptive, okay? You really want to think, are you just collecting information? Or are you answering an important question or testing a significant hypothesis? So that's why you need to, if you don't do this, if you don't state your hypotheses or your research questions, this is where you can fall into this, where they're saying, well, this is just descriptive. Okay. Sometimes they'll call it, you'll say this is a fishing expedition. You're proposing to do a lot of tests or different experiments, and it's not clear where you're going. So this is why you have to have very clear questions or hypotheses. Okay. If everybody goes through that phase of exploratory research, trying to, let me try this, let me try that. Usually that's part of your preliminary results, right? So you get some results from that and you say, hey, this looks interesting. Now I have a hypothesis for why this is happening. Now this is what I'm proposing to do to test that hypothesis. Okay. There are exceptions. So that's where the R21s are for. R3 sometimes are for that. But generally for most projects, they're going to want preliminary results. Okay. And that's part of, getting beyond that exploratory, a lot of times descriptive stage. I think that, one of those things that you have to really think about from the funder's point of view, everybody has all kinds of ideas, right? I think I might want to try this, I might want to try that, I might try to, but how many of those are going to, really work out? how do you figure that out? You do some preliminary work. Okay. And so, and so from a funder's point of view, they're not going to want to put a lot of money into stuff that is so preliminary, there's no result yet. Now, again, if it's really, a high risk, high payoff kind of idea, then that they may be willing to make that bet. But again, they have special mechanisms for that. Okay. So what is a hypothesis? A testable statement that helps explain a phenomenon or event, often makes predictions that then you're going to test, right? A lot of times those are tied to understanding of underlying mechanisms or theory. Now, this all will depend on your field, exactly how this works out. And a lot of times it provides rationale for strategies or approach. Okay. Your hypothesis needs to be significant. Okay. It needs to make a difference, right? You don't want to just say my hypothesis is something obvious, right? It needs to be non-obvious. It needs to be supported by some evidence. The evidence typically can be in the literature, but a lot of times it's going to be your preliminary results. Okay. And this is the new knowledge that you're going to generate. There are also sub-hypotheses, so those a lot of times can be more related to a broad central hypothesis, and those a lot of times will then motivate your aims, help guide your research plan. There may be working hypotheses. Those are much more kind of talking about why it is you're doing particular experiments, okay, or particular research surveys, or looking at particular questions. This is a lot of times a way to, for example, you say, I think it could be A or B. Okay, if my working hypothesis is A, I'm going to do these experiments. If it's B, I'm going to do these experiments. So this will help me determine which one it is. Right? I'm going to skip over this one. So, for example, you might have a broad question. So, for example, this one is, how does number word acquisition unfold in the developing brain? Okay, that's really broad. If whenever you have a how does this work kind of question, you need hypotheses, right, to guide. Well, yeah, how does it work? What do you think? This is too broad otherwise, right? But that can be the kind of set the framework for you. Okay, so in this one, they say, we hypothesize that the IPS grounds the development of symbolic number representations in perceptual representations of quality, and we'll test that using this particular approach, right? Another example, all right, a broad hypothesis. We propose that 2 of the wise social psychological interventions with some of the most strongest empirical support will be particularly useful in creating the right psychological landscape for more consistent and successful behavior change and weight loss, okay? And then I have this particular hypothesis I'm testing. Compared to children randomized to receive usual family-based care, we're going to actually add on these wise social psychological interventions, and we think that will significantly attenuate BMI. Okay, so that's the specific hypothesis they're going to test, and that's based on their broader hypothesis. So you can frame this. It just depends on your project and your field exactly how you frame this. You can have a big, broad question, then you have specific hypotheses. You can have a big hypothesis, specific questions. You can have, if you are more applied, for example, doing tool-based research, maybe you're going to focus on challenges. This will all, this is where getting your program officer to give you feedback can help you determine how you want to frame this. Okay, next thing is your aims. All right, so your aims are basically how you're going to do it. Okay, big thing for specific aims that's different from a lot of other agencies is they want them to be independent, okay? So if your specific aim 1 fails, you can still do aim 2, okay? That is hard a lot of times because most of us want to do process focus. First, I'm going to do this. First, I'm going to recruit a bunch of participants for my study. Then I'm going to, I'm going to administer this particular intervention. Then I'm going to study, then my next aim is this. That's not what they're looking for, right? They want knowledge-focused aims, right? I hypothesize that this intervention will work better in this situation because of XYZ or whatever, right? That's one aim, okay? And then to test that hypothesis, then I will, then do maybe, I'll have a number of steps to that. Recruit people for the study, administer the intervention, and so forth. But this is where you want to really think about how to structure your aims so they're independent, And they're also very specific. So they're not vague. They're not, I want to explore the effect of this intervention. That's not going to work. It's like, what specifically is your hypothesis is usually what they're looking for. Okay. And this avoids having what they call a house of cards proposal, where you have an early kind of very high risk step, and then everything else depends on you being successful in that first step. That's where reviewers really hate. Okay. They do not like to have, to fund a project where if you fail in your first aim and everything else depends on that, your project is done. All right, we are at time for a break. So we're going to take a 10-minute break. Everybody in the room, help yourself to coffee and goodies. And the bathrooms are just down the hall. And those of you on Zoom, help yourself to your own coffee and goodies. And we'll see you back in 10 minutes.
Just a couple of requests for the Zoom participants. We have a couple people that we don't have your name. It's something generic that's on Zoom. So if you could change your name on Zoom so that we can record that, that'd be great. If not, just message us and I think we can do it for you from this side. So, and then Dr. Joseph, I know you're on. I can't see. Do you mind turning off your mic and talking to us? We can see
Yes,
how it works in the room.
good morning. How are you
Perfect.
guys? You can hear me?
Just wanted to make sure that way when we get to
And
that panel, it'll
no
be good.
problem.
Okay,
So,
thank you so much.
So I have one question for Liz Lucy standing right beside you there.
Yes.
Yeah, so did Jim Flucky put you up to using my RFA and my grant as the examples?
I'm sorry, say it again.
I said did Jim Flucky set you up to using my RFA?
No, in fact, I didn't really. I got those before I knew who was going to be on the panel. I was just looking for relevant ones to this audience. So I didn't realize that they were yours.
Yeah, no, I saw that. I was like, oh, interesting. So
And I hope you feel free. If there's anything I say that you don't agree with or doesn't apply in your situation, feel free to jump in and correct me.
But no, everything you said was right on the button. So I have no problem with that. So now Jim Flucky and I go way back. We at Penn State, so we've known each other for quite some time.
Ah,
yeah,
great. Well, thank you. We really appreciate you joining us. I'm really looking forward to the panel.
No problem. Looking forward to it as well. All right.
We have 15 more seconds according to my time. All right. I hope you had a good break. Welcome back. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to finish a little bit talking about your planning, but then I'm going to go very quickly through like how to write a NIH proposal. But there are all these like detailed workshops that we have at A&M. Meg Bouvier comes in and does a workshop on NIH that goes into a lot of the much more detail on that. So this is just a kind of a quick overview, and I'm going to go pretty quickly. So because I want to have plenty of time for our Q&A. So just wanted to warn you about that. This is going to go lightning speed. Okay. All right. So we were talking about aims, specific aims, and having independent aims. So I think this is a nice example. Okay. So the proposed project will be the first study to examine whether language deficits in young children with autism spectrum disorder are linked to atypical domain general prediction process. Okay. And then her aims are determine the ability of toddlers with ASD to generate predictions compared to their typically developing peers. Establish whether toddlers with ASD exhibit hyperplasticity of learning. Examine the extent to which certain child characteristics predict individual variability and predictive behavior and so forth. Establish whether predictive behavior or hyperplasticity of learning on verbal tasks predicts vocabulary and syntactic ability 1 year later. Okay, so notice what they're doing. The verbs are all what they're going to learn: determine, establish, examine, establish, right? So this is all knowledge focused, right? Each of these aims is not recruit a number of toddlers is our first aim, subject them to these particular tests is our second aim, analyze the results is our third aim. That's that's the kind of the trap that a lot of particularly people who are new to NIH will do, right? They will focus on the actual experiments or surveys or whatever they're doing, right? They'll make their aims process focused. But then the reviewer has to figure out, well, why are you doing this, right? You're not being explicit about that. Here, these aims are, one, they're going to be more independent, and also they're knowledge focused. Okay, so that's what you're kind of aiming for. Common mistakes people make: having too many specific aims, particularly if you're new to NIH. Usually no more than 3 aims, right? So you don't want to be overly ambitious, because basically that increases the risk, the risk of failure. So reviewers tend to be kind of conservative. So you want to make sure that you are focusing in and really, putting a lot of effort into a few focused aims. Okay. Inclusion of a weak aim. I see this a lot. Well, I have a stretch aim, right? 3 really strong aims, and then I go put a stretch aim because this is so exciting. And if all this works, then we can do this other thing. Well, what happens? Your reviewers spend all the time talking about the weak aim. They can't say, well, we want to fund the first 3 aims and not the fourth one, or the first 2 and not the third. They have to either say yes or no. And so they're just going to be, pounding on that weak aim. Okay. So if if this is going to lead to something that's really exciting, that would be the next step. Just say that, right? After this project is finished, the next step will be, this is what we will do next, right? But don't make it contingent on being successful in these other aims, right? Aims that don't clearly address hypotheses or research questions. Aims that are vague with no clear outcome. I want to explore a phenomenon, right? And aims that are interdependent. Reviewers really dislike that. Now, sometimes you may have like aim 1 be, everything depends on aim 1, but usually if that is the case, aim 1 is extremely low risk. It's like, okay, we've already done all this sort of stuff, so this is just a very, kind of almost routine thing. So sometimes that happens, and I've heard reviewers say that they're okay with that, but in general, you want to try to have independent aims. And again, this is where your program officer can help you determine, is this a sufficiently independent aim? All right, we already talked about that. All right, what difference will it make? Your outcomes. Okay, so why are we doing this, right? Understand the role of social ties in communicating multiple cancer health habits. Is the potential advanced population health, reduce health disparities, improve patients' primary care experiences, set the stage for more research on an intervention. So all of this is part of what you want to make sure that you articulate that. Sometimes it seems obvious to you, but remember your reviewers are just reading through proposal after proposal. So you need to spell it out for them. Why is it that this, how is this going to benefit humans? All right. And then remember, if you have a premise that needs support, then you want to make sure to address that. So that is something where sometimes, a lot of times this is, more relevant if you're proposing a clinical trial, but still, a lot of times you have a particular rationale for what you're doing based on a set of facts, okay? And sometimes there's no, they're not controversial, but sometimes they may be. And sometimes it happens that you don't even really state what your premise is, and you're not really aware that you have to support it. If that's the case, then you can get in trouble, okay? So for example, this is just totally made up, okay? It has been found that children who live in cold climates are more likely to be allergic to chocolate, okay? That's what I'm stating that as my fact, right? I just said that because I used to be allergic to chocolate as a kid, and I'm still traumatized by that. All right, so based on these results, I hypothesize that that this particular thing, I hypothesize that cold, less light causes people to be more allergic to chocolate, whatever it is, right? Again, this is just a silly example. All right, and then I propose just this. I am stating this as a fact. Well, reviewers are like, oh, whoa. Really? Is that true? Children who live in cold climates are more likely to be allergic to chocolate? How many studies actually found this? Was this just one study? How good was that study? Like, what did they actually look at, right? So if you are in this situation where you're basing everything on a premise, really be sure that you scrutinize that, because if you lose the reviewers at your premise, then you've lost them all the way through, right? So really think about that. And that may or may not be the case, but this is something that NIH is really putting a lot of emphasis on, because this has been a problem in the past. Also, are there any limitations to the results? Did they only look at white kids? Did they only look at kids in the US? Did they only look at, whatever, right? So again, you have to address that if that's the case. A lot of times you may need preliminary data to support your premise, okay? Also, you may need preliminary data to support your hypotheses, to support the feasibility of your methods, to support the fact that you actually have the expertise to do this, particularly if you haven't published using a particular, experimental method or whatever. So those are all reasons to have preliminary results, okay? Expectations are really high for R01s. They want a lot of preliminary results. It's a 5-year project, it's a lot of money. They want want you to provide evidence you can do this, and it's likely to be successful, okay? Also, if you don't have a strong track record in this area, they're going to want more preliminary results. If there are any potential showstoppers, okay? So if if you cannot do X at the end of year 2, that's it, boy, they're really going to focus on that. That's where preliminary results can help you, right? Let's say you're going to track homeless families. You say, I'm going to do this intervention with families who are unhoused, and then I'm going to track them over the next 5 years. And it was like, whoa. Do you have any connection with the homeless shelter? Have you ever tracked, since probably a pilot study would be needed, right? Because reviewers are going to be thinking, oh, this sounds risky. I don't know that she can really track these. She can find them in a year or in 2 years, right? So that's where, again, thinking about what do you need to do to show your reviewers this is not that risky, that you have the capability to do what you're proposing to do, that to support your hypothesis, support your premise. Think about if you were the reviewer, what would concern you? And then what evidence do you need to support, to present to support that you actually are likely to be successful? And again, this is where getting other people to read it can be helpful. Okay. Corey was mentioning, another group of people who can be readers for you, give you feedback, is the Research Enterprise Office, right? They will read, they can read your they have the general scientific background, not necessarily in your specific field, but they can understand your research. And remember, a lot of times your reviewers are not specifically in your field either. So if they can understand your specific aims, if they can understand the main outlines of what you're proposing, that can be really great feedback. If they don't understand that, you probably need to go back and redo it. So you can talk to them about your hypotheses, about your aims, about all that kind of stuff, and they can give you feedback. All right, remember, you're going to be scored based on significance, investigator, innovation, approach, and environment. Like what difference will it make? Are you well qualified? Is your team well qualified? How is this different from what everybody else is doing? Do you have a well thought out approach that's likely to be successful? Do you have the resources you need to be successful? Okay, so that's all stuff you have to think of as you're planning your project. And that may mean you need to bring in a collaborator, a consultant, you need to engage with your stakeholders. All that kind of stuff is part of thinking about how is that going to address these review criteria. All right. This is just the main questions they're going to ask. Same things that you would expect for most scientific proposals to any agency. What's the merit in terms of the science? What's the impact? How novel is it and innovative? Is your hypothesis likely to be valid? Have you thought this through? Are you well qualified? Do you have the facilities you need? Okay. There's also a rigor and transparency requirement, authenticating, your resources you're using, making sure what you say you're doing, you actually are, reagents, all that kind of stuff. I won't go into a lot of detail, but definitely supporting your premise is part of that. All right, so I'm going to go quickly through this because I want to make sure we have plenty of time for our Q&A session. Okay, so let's talk about writing. Okay, first of all, there are all kinds of resources here. Okay, so you have the Research Enterprise Office. There's a lot of online resources. NIAID has taken the lead on this, the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases, and they have a great website. They have sample winning applications, and this is a link to those. And then I have more on your flash drive and in a link that you can download everything. The only problem is this is all NIAID proposals, so most of you probably is not at all in your area. So again, it would be helpful for you to get example proposals from in your discipline if you can, right? But still, you can at least see examples of how they did things. Okay, there's a how to apply application guide. Oh, really great information there. Sample letters, sample bio sketches, sample everything. They have the information on the review process, and then there's a video of the review process, all kinds of stuff here. So those are all a lot of good resources on NIH's website, so definitely take advantage of that. And again, in A&M, it presents much more kind of detailed how to write an NIH grant workshops that you can, that will go much more into the details than this one will. And you can sign up for those. Do you know how, Kesha, how they sign up for that? That's through the VPR's office? And so on writing NIH proposal, Meg Bouvier, you were saying Meg Bouvier does. Yeah, so that will go in a lot more detail than we have time for today. So just wanted to let you know when you're ready. You want to do that. Yeah. All right. Also, a lot of people find this helpful. I think it's more helpful for those doing bench science than it is necessarily for behavioral social scientists, but it's still helpful. This is a workbook by Russell Morrison about how to write NIH proposals, sort of a Mad Libs approach. If anybody played Mad Libs, very prescriptive, but if you're learning NIH language, this can be super helpful. A lot of people have told me they struggle to get funded, and then they use this workbook and they were funded. So can't argue with success. Okay, great. Yeah, so it helps you how to write a specific aim, all those kinds of things. Yeah. So great. Yeah. So definitely if you are, after you look at this, you think, boy, yeah, I think I could be successful getting funded by NIH. I want to write a proposal. That would be the next step, is to really get into the weeds of how to write. Yeah. And it may or may not quite fit, but at least it will push you into that language, which NIH just has a very specific language, so it can be a little bit kind of mysterious if you're not used to NIH, so that they can help you with that. More information here. A lot of these are just more for you to use later. So the application guide, the table of page limits for different kinds of grants. There's a link here. All the key sections. So you can see there's a lot to put together, like any federal proposal, right? So you have a cover letter, introduction, resubmission of a resubmission, your description, so forth. We're going to focus here on the research plan, but I have slides here on this other stuff that I'm just going to skip over here, that you can look at later. And I don't need to read these to you. Okay. So let's talk about the research plan, which is the meat of your proposal, what you will do if funded. Okay. And that is consists of the 1-page specific aims page for most proposals, not everything. I mentioned the MIRA, the DP2, which is the new, these are different, but for most other proposals, you'll have a specific aims page, and then you'll have a research strategy section, your bibliography references. Okay. So for an RO1, that's 1 page for specific aims and 12 pages for research strategy. For an RO3, it's 6 pages, research strategy, 1 page aims. R21 is 6 pages. So, again, it depends on the kind of project. Remember, I showed you a slide earlier that had a table of page limits. You can look up for what type of grant you're proposing and what the page limits are. Now, within the research strategy, generally, they ask for significance, innovation, approach are the main sections you need to have. Now, you can add additional sections, and you can have all kinds of subsections too, right? So, but that's what your reviewers are going to expect. Innovate, significance, innovation, approach. Okay. And within that, these are just kind of a typical way to divide this up. The big point I'm trying to make here is that your biggest section should be your approach section. So if you let your discussion of the literature, your discussion of the motivation, your discussion of innovation, all that stuff take over, and you got 7 pages of significance and innovation, you have very little room left for your approach and how you will do it, that's a recipe for failure, right? Reviewers are going to be wanting a lot of detail of actually what you will do. So you want to make sure that you kind of give yourself a page budget in your outline so that you don't, kind of let some of this discussion that maybe is easier to write, take over the whole research strategy section. Your specific aims page. Okay, so this is really key for NIH. That is sort of what reviewers will look at first, right? That is, should be the map to the whole rest of your proposal. And many reviewers tell me if they don't like that specific aims page, they kind of skim the rest of it, right? So it's really important. It's not because they're mean. It's not because they're lazy. It's because it's 2 in the morning and they got 6 other proposals they have to read that night, right? So really put a lot of effort in specific aims page and and again, make sure your aims are well formulated. Run this by, write up a draft specific aims page, run it by the program officer, run it by your colleagues, run it by the research enterprise office. Do all that before you go forward, because a lot of times what will happen is they'll say, aim 1 and 2 need to be combined, or aim 3 seems like it really should be 2 aims, or none of these are hypothesis based. You need to redo this. So that's going to be the foundation for the rest of your proposal. So you want to get that right before you go forward. All right, typical structure for that specific aims page is your long-term goal, significance, the context, what is the problem you're addressing. A lot of times people will start with the health problem first. Then you state your hypotheses, the research questions, your specific aims motivated by the hypotheses. That may be a 1-to-1 correlation, in which case you may have aim 1. This is what we're going to determine this, and then this is our hypothesis, or you may have a broad hypothesis and then the aims that address sub-hypotheses. Can be all kinds of ways to structure it depending on your project. There's not one way, but again, there needs to be a very clear story, like we were talking about before, where everything follows logically, right? And you want to be specific and concise and accurate, right? This is the basically map to the rest of your proposal. Anything that's really important in the rest of your proposal, put it in there. Like, for example, let's say you've got really intriguing preliminary results. Stick them in the specific aims page somewhere, right? That should be in there. Let's say you want to give a lot of background about, what has been done in exercise and its effect on bone density. That doesn't need to go in the specific aims page, right? That can go in your significance page part. So really think about what is key to your project that reviewers need to know. Don't make this an introduction. Make it a overview, a map of your whole project. And there are examples here for NIAID. I have some examples that I've given you, but again, you want to probably try to talk to people in your field and see if you can get examples from them. This is just an example, a specific aims page of a funded proposal where it's just, this is the first paragraph where they just pack all this information. They pack their project goal in there, their team in there, what's unique about the project, what the significance is in one paragraph, right? So this is why a lot of times you have to go through lots of drafts of a specific aims page to really refine it, make it really dense and concise. And then this is an example. They have aim 1, okay, define structural variation in parvovirus capsids. They state their hypothesis, and then they have their steps in here. And then aim 2, this is what they're going to do: define structural interactions, hypothesis, aims. That's just one way to do it. Like I said, that may not be exactly how you do it, but again, very clear. This is the aim. This is how it relates to the hypothesis, and then you can give details underneath. All right. All right, significance is, that's key to funding. This is what basically, what is the motivation, and also what are other researchers trying to do? What are the gaps you're addressing? How is this relevant to human health and disease? Okay. Remember, this is not a review paper. It needs to be concise. It needs to be focused on your hypothesis. What is known in the literature? And why is this important in the context of your hypotheses and your aims? Okay. Innovation is really based on, okay, how is what you're doing different from what others have done in this area? Okay. And it can be scientifically innovative. You have innovative hypotheses, innovative model system, maybe technologically innovative. Hey, you have new tools that you're going to use. Just be clear, what is your argument? Okay. Approach, that's where a lot of times you will talk about what you've done so far. Then you talk about how you're going to accomplish each aim. You may have preliminary data for each aim, or you may have preliminary data just at the top. You can do it many different ways. The big thing, though, is be really clear about what you've already done versus what you're proposing to do. This is a really common mistake people make, is they say, okay, aim 1 is to do this. All right, for first I've already done X, and now then I'm going to do Y. And then on this part, I've already done X, A, I'm going to do B. And they mix it all in. And what happens is reviewers at 2 in the morning get confused, and they don't know what you already did versus what you're going to do, because it's all mixed together. Okay. So instead, preliminary results, proposed work, make it easy for that reviewer at 2 in the morning. Okay. So because otherwise what will happen is they will either say, looks like she's already done all the work, why should we fund her? Because it looked like everything was preliminary results. Or they'll say, looks like he didn't do any work on this yet, why should we fund him? Right? Because they missed that some of it was preliminary, you've already done versus what you're proposing to do. So just make it easy for that poor reviewer. Remember, they may not be experts right in your area. They are probably reading this at 2 in the morning. You're the 3rd proposal that they've read that night. So make it easy. Be really clear. Divide things up. Put subheadings. Put bold. Preliminary results. The proposed work. Future work. Don't let that all get confused in their minds. A lot of times when you're trying to do this, really think about like having task 1, task 2, task 3, kind of be real clear. Don't let this become a big, we could do this, we might do this. This could be, kind of a brainstorming session. Sometimes you see that. Have clear step-by-step plan for what you're going to do. If there's anything that, that it's going to be a special challenge. So for a lot of you, it may be, powering your study. How are you going to analyze your data, your statistical methods, recruiting, participants, dealing with attrition in a study, all these kinds of things, address those, right? Anything that's challenging, because if you don't address it, if you just kind of skate over it, what happens is reviewers think that you're naive and you don't know it's hard, right? It's better to acknowledge something is going to be challenging. Tracking these families that are unhoused, and you have to track them over 5 years, acknowledge that's hard. How are you going to deal with that? Talk about that, okay? That's part of talking about risks and mitigation, okay? And then also you can talk about, if this doesn't work, this is what I'll do. Also, a lot of times they'll talk about alternative approaches in the context of, well, someone might consider it would be better to do it this way. This is why I'm doing it this way. Sort of a way to be in the room and anticipate what the reviewers might be questioning. Okay. And then just remember, the reviewers, are not going to read your mind, and they're usually not in your field, exactly in your field. You can see what their backgrounds are by looking at the study section roster, right? And think about it from their point of view. Get a lot of people to read it and make sure, especially that specific aims page, is accessible to somebody who is absolutely not in your field, right? All right, the rest of this is all, budget, all that sort of stuff. The Research Enterprise Office can help with the budgets, right? Okay, great. Yeah. And, and especially when it comes to things like your budget narrative and that kind of stuff, justification. So this is all just resources for you. All right. So now let's talk about the review process. Okay. So the review process for NIH is kind of Byzantine. Okay. So you have your study section. Again, you can look up the rosters for the study section within your Center for Scientific Review. Sometimes there's a special emphasis panels that come and go to, for multidisciplinary kinds of or specific initiatives, so that you may not be able to look those up. And sometimes it's within your particular institute, but generally you're going to have kind of a home study section that you're going to be going back to over and over again. All right, so you have that panel, the study section, right? And so each person is going in within that panel is going to be assigned a number of proposals. Your proposal will probably be assigned to like 3 to 5 reviewers, right? They will take it home and they will read it. Okay. Then if they think your proposal is in the bottom half, right? So they're saying, this one, I see a problem. I just don't think that this is even going to be in the top half of those that we consider. If everybody who's been assigned your proposal agrees, then they say, okay, we will, we're going to review these. We'll write up our reviews, but we're not going to discuss them in the, when we all meet, because we just don't have time. If everybody who's been assigned this proposal thinks it's in the bottom half, they don't have any, chance of getting funded. So that means you're streamlined if that happens. Okay. Used to be called triage. Now it's called streamline. And that is, that happens to everybody. Okay. It just may be one flaw, right? They just didn't believe you could do X, right? Or they had a real problem with Y. Could be they really didn't feel it was was significant enough. Can be lots of different reasons. Okay. But I know of folks who've gotten streamlined the first time, they fixed the problem, they came back, they got funded. Okay, so there is no shame in being streamlined. It just means, okay, it didn't even make the cut. It didn't get discussed. That happens. Okay. Now, assuming, so then for all the proposals though, your assigned reviewers will go through and they will rate you based on the different review criteria: significance, investigator, innovation, approach, and environment. They will give you between a 1, which is the best, and a 9, which is the worst, assuming you're discussed. Okay, so significance, you might get a 3, investigator a 2, innovation a 4, approach a 2, environment a 3, right? So okay, and then they will write up why they gave you those things. Then, assuming you're going to be discussed, they all come together in a panel. They discuss it. Everybody then gives you ratings, right? And then they take those ratings. They calculate a mean score from all the reviewers, and then they multiply by 10. So you get an impact score, which is one number, okay? And that is between 10 and 90. So 10 is the best possible you could ever get, right? 90 would be very bad. Usually that you won't get that because you will have been streamlined anyway. But this is then the score, your impact score, that then determines, okay, do you make the cut? Okay, so many times, but not always, the institutes will take those scores and they will calculate percentiles based to try to correct for the fact that different panels may be more or less lenient in the way they score. So sometimes you'll get a percentile ranking. Sometimes you'll just get a score, depending on the institute, depending on the particular funding opportunity. Okay, so you might say, oh, I got a score of 23. That was 8 percentile, right? I got a score of 34, and that was 50 percentile, right? So based on that, you will get your score, you'll get a summary statement, okay? A lot of times you will get, when you get that, it will be, oh, I got a 45. I know that's not even the fundable range, okay? So I'm going to start working on my, my revision. But sometimes you will get a score that's like 24. That's really, yeah, that could be funded, could be, it's like on the, so now those go to the institute, and then you just got to wait to see what their decision is, okay? So for some of them, they'll give you a special, you know, you don't have to have as good a score for when, if you get, you know, you don't have you have to have a good score if you are a new investigator or an early career, early stage investigator. It depends on their budgets, depends on all kinds of things. And so then you're just on tenterhooks. They're usually pretty quick at giving you your summary statement and your score, but then it can take a long time to hear back from the institute if you are in the fundable range. Sometimes you get really good score and then you're pretty confident you'll get funded. But again, it has to fit the priorities of the institute. So they have to decide. Sometimes they will see a proposal that really didn't get a fundable score, but it's, you know, but it's still exactly in a priority they have. And they can reach down and say, oh, okay, I'm going to fund that anyway, right? So they do have some leeway, but it's pretty tied to your score. You know, if you're used to going to National Science Foundation, those program officers have a lot more leeway than usually at NIH in terms of what they fund. Okay, then it has to go up the pecking order, up the, you know, the bureaucratic chain at the institute and to the advisory board, and they approve everything, and then you'll hear for sure if you got funded. Okay, there are some institutes will publish pay lines, so that's the percentile score below which most applicants will be funded. So you'll hear like 6th percentile is our funding line or our pay line. That does not mean only 6% of the proposals got funded. That's not that's just the percentile score. Okay, and there's all this discussion if you want to look in blogs and so forth about what the differences are here, but just don't let that scare you too much. Okay, and remember, you can go to report and see what actual funding rates are, right? Which is not the same as a pay line. Okay, and then again, pay lines are more lenient for new investigators, and they will reach down for high priority things. NIAID publishes their pay lines. They're very transparent. And then some of the institutes don't do that. Some do. Okay. All right. If you get funded, celebrate. And remember, you know, this is the start of hopefully a lovely relationship with NIH. So be sure to do well on your first project so you can go back and get more funding. If you don't, read the reviews, get mad and depressed. Everybody does. Remember that you can talk to, you know, national academies, you know, scientists, and they will show you a whole drawer full of declined proposals. This is just part of the process, right? Put the reviews in the drawer for a few days, read the reviews carefully after you calm down, right? And then look at what is it, did they have concerns about? Can you fix it? Did they have a problem with the topic? That might be a, you know, killer. Was it more about the methods? Was it more about details about your particular approach? You know, can you fix those things, right? And then talk to your NIH program officer. And a lot of times they can give you feedback. That a lot of times they will sit in when the things are being reviewed that they know are going to go to them at their institute, so they can tell you what to do next. You know, should I just revise and resubmit? Maybe this is not a good fit for that study section, and so forth. Okay, and then you can revise, resubmit, or start with a totally different idea. If you do resubmit, you then will have the opportunity to write an introduction to the resubmission, as I mentioned before, explaining how you address their review, their concerns. Even if you don't get funded, remember, you can continue working on your ideas. The feedback from the reviewers will help you come up with a better proposal next time. And also, if you're eligible, you can volunteer to be a reviewer through the early career reviewer program, and that can be really helpful to understand what reviewers are looking for. No matter what, your next proposal is going to be better than your last. You're going to get to know NIH, you're going to get to know your program officer, and you're going to learn a lot, and your projects are going to get better. All right, so this is the time for our panel. And our first speaker is on Zoom. That's Dr. Lyndon Joseph. He piped up a little bit ago talking about some of the stuff we were talking about, or actually his projects. He's a program officer at the National Institute on Aging's Division of Geriatrics and Clinical Gerontology. And I'm just going to kind of ask Dr. Joseph to tell us a little more about himself and you know, let him tell kind of anything that you want to talk about in terms of things that advice you have for somebody who's new to NIH, and I'll have more questions for you after that. Are you there, Dr. Joseph?
Yes. Good morning,
Great.
everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. So really and truly, I logged on to hear what would be presented earlier on, and Lucy basically hit everything on the nail on the head in terms of her advice and everything. So, I guess the best way to move forward is question and answer. But what I can say, a couple of things that she pointed out are really key in terms of the AIMS page. That really sells your project going forward, and she's absolutely correct. If it doesn't sell the reviewer, it's you're fighting an uphill battle. All right. The ambitiousness of the project, especially depending on the stage of your career. So most of you are in your early stage career. I know we want to solve all the problems in the world, but you really got to figure out your trajectory and where you're going. And so being very specific in what you want to do is also going to be key for early stage investigators, especially for people who are doing K awards. Talking to your program officer, we really enjoy talking to you, especially for junior investigators, because what we try to do is to pull out where you want to go now and where you think you're going 5-10 years down the road. And that would help you to focus the project that you're trying to do. What kind of training do you think you absolutely need? If you're an exercise physiologist who've been doing physical activity monitoring for the last 5 years, and you write that as your training, that's a non-starter, right? So why are you doing a K award? What else? So let's just stop there and see if you have any other questions. How's that?
So I wonder if I could ask, do you work with PIs who are proposing qualitative or mixed methods kinds of research? Is that something that comes up?
Yeah, no, not in my area. My portfolio as an exercise physiologist, my portfolio has a lot to do with rehab and interventions and rehab projects. Qualitative research, not much for me, but if people are interested in that, I can definitely connect you to program officers who have more experience in that type of work. Are you specifically asking about what kind of projects are funded with those?
Yeah, and also kind of what are there particular things or concerns that you see in the PIs who are proposing research that you would be funding, that there are common mistakes people are making?
Common mistakes. Actually, you highlighted one very one that I see all the time is what exactly is your aims? What exactly the hypotheses you're testing? Some of them are too general. And so when that happens, the reviewers are like, well, you're so general, I really don't see what you're trying to do. The overambitiousness, as I mentioned, that's one. The analysis, to be honest with you, the analysis plan, NIH has been putting a lot of focus on the analysis plan. And that's where it helps, where your aims page is very clear, because your aims page is what then helps you to write the rest of your grant. So if your aims and your hypothesis is set up perfectly, or I shouldn't say perfectly, set up well, then your analysis plan will be written to answer, to decide or to help the reviewer see how you're going to answer the hypothesis. One of the biggest mistakes I do see is, you have a good project, good data collection, good intervention, but you say, oh, I'm just going to do an analysis of variance and leave it like that. You got to go deep into the analysis plan. Are you looking at covariates? What kind of variables interaction that are you looking at? Do you have the appropriate power calculation to see the effect that you're trying to see? Those are some weaknesses that really pops out.
How do you prefer to be contacted? If somebody thinks they, you know, that you would be their program officer, what do you prefer in terms?
Email. We don't do cold calls.
Don't show up at your house.
Right. Just email me with a rough aims page. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just is a rough aims page that sort of gives the direction in which you're going. And what that helps me to do too is to figure out whether or not it belongs to me or somebody else in the NIA. We have 4 divisions, as you well know, and you might think you are interested in A, but then once you put it down on paper and we start reading it, I'm like, well, this probably is more behavioral than a clinical outcomes project, you know? And so if it's more behavioral, I'll find somebody, you know, Division of Behavioral and Social Research. You know, ask about qualitative research. If I read the aims page and I realize you're really doing qualitative research and not quantitative research, I'll find the program officer to talk to you. But that's just your start. And as was mentioned, you know, you got to spend a lot of time on the aims page. Because if that's not well written and directional, the review, it just makes it more difficult for the rest of the application.
I want to open it up for everybody else. I've been asking all the questions. Does anybody have any questions they want to ask here? Or I guess you can tell me if there's anybody online who has any questions. Yeah, we've already Does anybody have any questions? So can you tell me a little bit? I'll keep asking questions.
No
So tell me a little bit about what you see when you're watching study section reviews, or things that you think that might surprise PIs who are new to NIH in terms of how the study section works and what they're looking for.
So in the review number 1 basically describes the overall project, what you're doing, what your aims is, what your hypothesis, how you're analyzing everything, and then they identify the strengths and the weaknesses. So the reviewers pay particular attention to review number 1, and review number 1 is usually the ones who have the expertise in it. Review number 2 and 3 then chimes in and say, we agree with you, or here's some things that you pointed out that I think is of interest, and makes it an exciting project, but you didn't talk about it. But in terms of the discussion, people usually rely on review number 1. But if there's a difference between the reviewers, it depends on how you convince the reviewer that likes your project, right? And if they really like it, they will defend it in the overall discussion. But if they just have a lukewarm feeling to it, then, they will say, well, I could probably like to see a little bit more of this or a little bit more of that. And so let's give it a decent score so that it comes back in, but it's not going to be a fundable score. But what happens there is that they really focus on how you present the project. And it's all about presentation. And as you mentioned, your approach section. Really after you spend your time on the aims page, really focus on the approach, which is how you're going to collect the data, how you're going to analyze the data. And if there's a difference in the review between review number 1 and review number 2 or number 3, that's where discussions really takes place, right? Is how you're approaching things. Reviewer 1 might say, well, I don't really like the theory that they're going to do to analyze the data, because it could be that review number 1 was trained in a particular type of theory, and I've seen that, right? But then review number 2 and 3 were trained in a different type, and so they said, well, why don't you consider X, Y, and Z? And now remember, the other 28 people have no idea about what you're doing, so they're going to rely on that discussion. So I say that to say, if you're going to do some sort of approach where you are proposing to use a type of theory to defend your hypothesis, make sure you have some very good justification for that and why you're doing it. I know that's a roundabout way to answer the question that was just asked, but that's how the discussion goes. So if you're trained in a particular area and you're proposing to do stuff in that, reviewer number one might be trained in a different area and prefers that area, that way of approach. So it will depend on your justification so that reviewer number 2 and 3 can then say, well, even though this approach might be better from your perspective, you know, from how they present it, I actually see why they're doing what they're doing. In situations like that, some of the outside reviewers might then take the opportunity to pull up the application to read it briefly, but the majority of them do not. And so the way you justify how you're going to do the project is really crucial.
Oh, that's fascinating. What about, when you talk to a PI and they're like, I'm not sure if I'm ready to submit, sometimes there's a concern about, do they have enough preliminary data or they have enough publications? How do you advise them on that?
Yeah, that's usually always a tricky one, to be honest with you. If you don't have a lot of preliminary data, but it's convincing to you, right? Then that's where you then try to convince the reviewer that, look, the preliminary data points me into this direction. This is why I'm going to that direction. And then if you only have 2 or 3 publications in the overall topic, I usually say, sometimes this is where your co-investigators can help. Okay. Your co-investigators have experience in certain areas that you might be lacking, then the co-investigator in their bio sketch can talk about what they're bringing to the project. All right. So that what you're doing is telling the reviewer, okay, yeah, I'm young. I have some interesting preliminary data. I only have 2 publications, but this is so important to me that I actually developed a team around me and around the project that's really going to help me as a junior investigator to answer this question and help me on my career trajectory path. Okay. If you're a well-seasoned investigator, you're just going to have to just do your best to sell why this is important and use your past. I've done A, which led me to B, done B, which led me to C, C, which led me to D. And I know this D is pretty outside the box, but if you look at the trajectory, this is where it's taken me. And so with what I've done in the past, all right, that I can accomplish and complete these projects. And so, it's just a different way of convincing the reviewers. Whereas if you're a new state investigator, you're saying, okay, yeah, I know you're concerned that this is a very innovative and risky project, and you're not sure that I can complete such a project in 5 years, but look at who I have surrounding me to help me along that path.
And this is in the bio sketch that you recommend people do that?
I recommend people talk about it in the bio sketch to co-investigators, say, this is my experience and this is what I bring to this project. Because remember, you get what have you contributed to science, right? So you can use that as well. In this paper that was published, this is what it shows. But then that first paragraph in the bio sketch, you can say, got my expertise is in this, and because of what I've done over the last 5 or 10 years, I bring X, Y to the project, and why you think the project is creative and innovative.
Right. Okay. And I think that brings up. I skipped over bio sketch really quickly, but that is a great point that it's really different than a lot of other agencies like NSF and the way where your bio sketch is just basically kind of a list of your positions and your publications. These are essays that you can write.
Right.
So that's a good point. Does anybody have any questions? Yes. So the question is, how many people sit on study sections?
It really depends. There are the standing members, which are about 10 to 15, probably sometimes 20. And then depending on the topics that are up for review, then they have what they call mail-in reviewers. So it could go up to 30, 35 members, all right? Because they might have something very creative, very innovative, and they only have one person on the current panel who have an idea of what it is. So they might bring in a true expertise or two to help review that. So it could go anywhere from 20 to 40, to be honest with you. And so that's what you got to take into consideration too, is that you might only have one or two people on the panel who knows what you're doing. And the others, you know, they're scientists, so they can understand and read the Ames page and understand what you're trying to do. But it's convincing the three reviewers, and then the others could say, well, okay, yeah, I buy reviewer number 2's discussion over reviewer number 1 discussion, and then they give the score. I hope that helps.
Wait, I hear a lot of times from guys who get frustrated because they got declined, they got the reviews, they revised their proposal, and then there were other concerns that came up the next time, or there were even contradictory feedback from what their first feedback was. What do you suggest in that?
Unfortunately, it happens more often than you think. And that's because we're humans. And a reviewer, they could look at it and say, wow, okay, they answer every single concern that was brought up. But if it's a new reviewer, they bring in their bias to everything as well. And they could say, well, that's great. You answered all the questions, but here's something that I think has been bothering me that you didn't approach. And if they think it's a major problem, then you run into some issue. But it happens a lot more often than you take. I've had reviews, I've had grants that were on the board of getting funded. Let's say the funding line was cut at 9% and they got a 10%. And there were no concerns at all, none. And so I encouraged them to resubmit. They resubmit, and they went from a 9% to a 25%. Because one reviewer, the new reviewer decided, you know, this weakness is more major than the previous reviewers didn't highlight, or they highlighted and say it's a minor weakness. And usually with a minor weakness, you don't do anything to it, right? So it's a risk, unfortunately. And I have pulled out my hair. I don't have any in my head, so I pull out what's left when I have those kind of reviews. But it happens, unfortunately. But what I tell people in this case is, look, if this is your baby and this is what you want to do, you're just gonna have to bite the bullet and be patient and persistent and resubmit.
Anybody? Oh, yes, Dr. Hernandez.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you heard that. So what are the more effective approaches to writing than introduction to a resubmission?
The effective approach is you get the resume, right, which is a summary of the discussion. The first thing you do, you answer those weaknesses that are brought up in the resume section. If you then have room, I usually tell people to do the approach weaknesses, especially for review number 1, because the approach section score usually drives well with the overall impact score. And so since I said review number 1 is the one who introduced the application, highlight the major weaknesses, and talk about strengths as well, but they really highlight the major weaknesses. I tell people to go to the approach, look at the weaknesses that they brought up, and then answer those. Then you go to the approach for number 2 and number 3. If you then do have more room, then you look at the innovation. Okay, if the weakness is brought up there, then you answer those. But usually the major weaknesses are brought up in the resume and summary section, and you tackle those first.
Great, that's really helpful. Anybody else have any questions? Okay, well, thank you so much. I think I'm gonna now ask Dr. Hernandez to come up and talk a little bit about his experience. And if you don't mind, you can, if you could, you probably may have some responses to some of his experiences also, and feel free to just jump in. but come on
Sure,
up and yeah,
I'll stay on, yes.
yeah, so you can, so everybody can hear you over here, if you don't mind. So I wondered if you could just start off introduce yourself, but also talk about what your, like your path was to funding.
Sure. There we go.
There we go. Better? Ah, good. So my path to funding, it started off early, been a co-investigator, particularly when I was a postdoc and then an early assistant professor on some funded projects, working with more senior investigators in a co-investigator role. So I've been a co-investigator probably on, I don't know, I think 4 funded grants, R01s, UO1s, and so forth, and really learn the ropes that way. So it was really helpful to kind of early in my career take that approach of being senior personnel, learn how the grant kind of sausage is made in my particular area, and then venture forth. Let's see, I've been a PI on a multi-PI project. Let's see, 1 UO1 and 1 RO1. And so, talent benefits about 6 grants that have been on for NIH funding. Let's see, other aspects of kind of the process. I really think, for me, a lot of it was, learning the ropes from more senior investigators, contributing to grants early on in smaller ways, and then taking on major roles and PI roles later on. So it's kind of that building process. And also at the same time, building up my preliminary evidence, building up, my publication record in an area that's relevant. So that's probably getting to know. I mean, you heard it. I've nothing really to add to the fact that you really have to know your IC and who the people are and all that about, putting together a half page or a full page specific aims to send forward and get feedback on early is really helpful, because that really can help you figure out if you're in the right place, and figure out if you're doing the right thing in the right place. Using that reporter tool to see if somebody's already done your idea is also really helpful, just to make sure, because why would they fund us do basically the same project twice? So identifying the uniqueness and the innovativeness of the project's really helpful early on. But that's my experience up to today. I don't know if folks have questions on any aspect of that.
Are there any mistakes you made that you really learned from early in the process? Anything that, you think others would benefit? I don't want to embarrass you, but probably
No,
many other people
I
will make the
mean,
same mistake.
So I think that I don't know that these were big mistakes. Some of the things were funded anyways, but when things were not funded, a lot of times it had to do with not enough preliminary evidence. And I think that was just as a team or me as an individual, not highlighting the preliminary evidence in the right way, or maybe not bringing enough of it to that section. So, the multiple times that, I've been on a team, or I myself has gotten, a proposal that, got scored and didn't get funded. Those are many times. So another piece of this is you just kind of have to keep going forward. You can't get funded if you don't keep putting in proposals. That's the people who get funded are the ones who, do it a lot, because it's super different from publishing, which is what we learn in graduate school. But you got to keep doing it over and over and over and over again, and get to know your agency, and in this case, your IC. I think preliminary evidence was really important in some of the pieces in terms of justifying our approach. And then the note here, it's really important, is that whole approach section, and having sufficient detail that people can understand what you're doing, and have a confidence that it's been justified, and that you've thought through what happens if it doesn't go perfectly, anticipated problems and strategies to address those problems important. I think, when we don't get funding, yeah, it's usually the approach that is where, we get caught either in preliminary evidence or detail around the nature of the study, if it's an intervention study or something like that. Lyndon? Oh, Dr. Joseph, go ahead.
Yeah, Lyndon is fine. In terms of makes mistakes, I can say major mistakes that I've seen is when the grantee decide that they're not going to pay any attention to any of the reviewers' comments and just resubmit the application without trying to address any of the concerns. You can address it and say, thanks for your concerns, but this is why I did the way I did it, as opposed to say, I just totally don't agree with you. I've seen those when they say, I totally don't agree with you, so I'm not changing. So, they don't say, so I'm not changing anything. They'll say, I totally don't agree with you, and they resubmit. Reviewers don't really like that. They, at least you acknowledge the question that was addressed. If you don't agree, you, in a diplomatic way, say why you're doing what you're doing. That's some major mistakes that I've seen.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I don't know. I think many of us have served on grant reviews and have put a lot of time in, and you don't get really much in the way of compensation. It's just you're volunteering your time. So appreciating that fact, that would not be well taken for me as well.
That you find particularly irritating or particularly actually engaging, things that when you're looking at a proposal, you go, oh boy, I want to read this, or you think, oh gosh, I don't want to read this.
I think you all have said it before, but the importance of the specific aims page is cannot be overstated. If you're reading a specific aims, or as you're writing your specific aims, it has to be super compelling and interesting. That's the thing that I think I've written, probably invested most of the time in, because once that piece is tight and well written, it makes the rest of the proposal, the 12-page narrative, so much easier to write. That's your kind of your path forward for really clearly identifying, your central hypotheses, your sub hypotheses, your particular aims, and then the methods you'll use to address those. And so, in terms of where I've invested my time and colleagues have, it's really in getting that specific aims page right. And as a reviewer, if the specific aims page is muddled, it's hard to imagine that it's going to get better over 12 pages. So that's, I don't think that's annoying. It's just a practice. It takes a lot of time. Go ahead.
So we look at a lot of proposals in the group here, and I can't agree with that more. Also, when we get that and there's 7 days before the due date, there's no going back at that point. You're not going to overly adjust it. So I think that grant planning, which Lucy talks about, it's a big deal. And planning ahead and being active and knowing when your deadline is and getting the thing done. That was my question. My question was, you talked about being a co-investigator, co-PI on grants early in your career. Do you have any suggestions on how to develop those relationships as early investigators, right? Because yeah, that's great, but who wants to take me on, right? Who wants to be my mentor kind of thing? And I realized that would be both internal here at A&M with people in your department or in the college, but also external with colleagues at other institutions, and people have connections, but kind of how you think the best way to go about that.
Start with your local network. That's what I would say. Start by looking around you and mapping out who you know and who they know. So reaching out to who you know to ask them who they know who is doing the thing that you want to do is really important. I can tell you I have been on teams, multidisciplinary teams that have not worked well because someone on the team, someone didn't know them well, and it just kind of sours the whole team. There've been some unfortunate things that have come from that. So the best way, my experience is that you talk to the people you know well, and have them connect you with the people they know well. Because there's, if you think about people's networks, they grow exponentially as you think about, like you might know 5 people, but each one of those people knows 5 people. And so, shake the tree in terms of figuring out who's doing the kind of work that you would like to do. I would say I still actively cultivate relationships. I take people out for coffee a lot. If I find them here or elsewhere or at conferences who are doing really innovative and creative things, and try to continue to grow my my network of potential collaborators. Dr. Joseph, please.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And one of the other advice I'll give is when you go to annual meetings, try to read the posters, even if it's of the student of the guy you want to talk to. Read the posters, try to have a conversation, and then try to meet them at those meetings. That's where you're gonna form this collaboration. And it's so true. Talk to the people that you trust, right? And be frank. When you try to reach out to somebody and you're trying to meet somebody, if you know somebody who knows them, just ask them, sit up, are they good collaborators? And people are usually honest and say, well, look, if you have a thick skin and you can take harsh criticism, you can work with this guy. If you don't have a thick skin and can't take harsh criticism, don't even get close, right? It's not that they're bad talking to the person, but they're just telling you how they are as a scientist. And so talking to the person that you trust is the first way. And not only at national meetings, at your local meetings. I don't know if other organizations do this, like for the American College of Sports Medicine, they have local organizations. And so reach out to those people as well. But conferences are a very good place to sort of broaden your collaborative efforts.
Yeah, absolutely. We have here at Texas A&M, just if you're looking local, the Scholars page, Scholars Library page. And I'll just be honest, when I first got here, I was leveraging that to cold email folks. I asked folks that I work with, who do you know at Texas A&M who'd be good to work with in terms of collaborations, and got lots of names. I've taken lots of folks out to coffee. I think coffee is a great, or tea, whatever you drink. It's a great way to get to know somebody, to share, 30 minutes to see whether or not this is the kind of person you'd want to spend 3 or 5 years doing a project together with. You can usually figure that out at the end of 30 minutes of a coffee.
So we've had a couple of questions on the chat that are more about, potential opportunities in specific areas. I'm not going to put you guys on the spot and say, is this particular topic going to be something that NIH is interested in? But if I'm looking for, specific areas or potential of future funding in a specific topic or area that may or may not be applicable in NIH, how would I go about it? What maybe the best ways to kind of go about getting a feel for that pulse, I guess?
I can just tell you what I do. I'm always looking for opportunities to fund projects. There's never a time where I'm not looking to fund project, to fund staff, research staff, graduate students. It's a never-ending cycle. So using the reporter to figure out what's been funded, and signing up for the Friday email. I can't remember what they call it. There's an email that comes out every Friday about funding opportunities announcements. And so that takes 5 minutes to scan. Sometimes it's more that I scan it and I know somebody who, look at item 30, that would be good for you. And I just forward it on. But that's, I can't remember that email. It's a NIH email. You can sign up, and it's every Friday. You get these emails about funding opportunities, future funding announcements. And then open mic is another thing that I signed up for. And that's open mic is, I can't remember Mike's last name. He sends out a newsletter less regularly on topics related to NIH that is very helpful. So between those 3 resources, the report, the NIH report, or reporter subpage, looking for keyword searches, the Friday email, and then open mic is how I am constantly on the lookout for funding opportunities.
Yeah, and to follow up
Oh,
on
go
that,
ahead.
to follow up on that, the matchmaker is a very good tool as well. But just so you also know too, a lot of the institutes, we do communicate, program officers communicate with POs from different institutes. And so after you found that, the other best way is to send an Ames page to the one program officer, because you might think that your topic is of interest to NIA, but the way you've written it, right, could be, where is it actually NIAMS? Like, for instance, I got a lot of musculoskeletal projects, but you're not interested in this from an agent perspective. You're really interested in the topic from a structural mechanical perspective, right? If you're interested from a structural mechanical perspective, I would say talk to somebody over at National Institute of Aging on arthritis and musculoskeletal conditions. But if you're interested in it from an agent perspective on how it affects function or mobility, right, then it's an agent grant. So it's a slight nuance. And so once you've figured that out, and you contact the program officer, then they would be honest with you and say, okay, are you trying to be for that particular example, just a pure musculoskeletal researcher, or are you really interested in musculoskeletal conditions as we age? Okay, so there's a lot of steps involved, and it's up to you to really follow through. But you know, as you said, to do NIH reporter, matchmaker, do your rough draft, Ames page, reach out to a program officer, and then you can take it from there.
Thank you, Lyndon, but I just also add that there is a concepts process where for each institute, the program officers and so forth can propose concepts that then go up through to the advisory council, and they publish those, and those are like things they want to fund in the future, and that is publicized actually through exactly the same things that we were talking about, emails and so forth. So you can find out about approved concepts. So if you want to get in the weeds to that extent, you can look at those. I didn't go into all that, but you know, particularly if you know there's a particular institute that you think, well, they may be interested in this in the future, this is a hot topic, you can look for those approved concepts. Anybody have any questions? Yes, I'm sorry, I forgot. I can hear you, I forgot.
I'm going to plug another service that the REO office can provide. We have on our website, and we'll plug it into the chat, a link to schedule a chalk talk. And it's where you kind of prepare your proposal idea. You reach out to us, we'll schedule some subject matter experts to come in and listen to you talk about your idea. They can provide input. We've linked people up with collaborators before. The idea started in KNSM and has been pretty successful. So we're trying to kind of take that model school-wide.
Any other questions? So your field is it educational psychology?
Yes.
Okay.
Educational psychology.
I know there are a number of people here, and we haven't really talked a lot about educational psychology. Could you talk a little bit about, like, where have you gone for funding? What kind of general types of projects you propose?
Yep. So as an educational psychologist, like, what I do applies to any discipline. That's, so I've been looking at socializing experiences, relationships, and motivation in the context of biomedical workforce development. And so looking at the development of the next generation biomedical workforce from self-regulated learning perspective, looking at socializing experiences in terms of high-impact practices like undergraduate research experiences, looking at mentoring in particular as an intervention. And that is the place in which all of my work fits in that intersection, the intersection between mastery experiences, motivation, and how those relate to the next generation of the biomedical workforce and STEM workforce. Like, when I pitch these ideas to NSF, it's STEM workforce, but for NIH, it's biomedical. All the funding that I've gotten let's see, all the funding that we have has either come from NIGMS or the Common Fund through NIGMS. So they have most recently, some of the work has been funded through the leadership of the Diversity Program Consortium, and that came from Common Funds, but it kind of matriculated through NIGMS. And that's really the institute where all my money has come from, or not my money, all the money that funds the research that we're doing comes from, or comes through NIGMS, the National Institute for General Medical Sciences.
Are there any other questions? So I want to let our panelists kind of give their final words of wisdom. Lyndon, I'll let you go first. Is there anything, you think that that people really need to walk out with if they're totally new to NIH, or any advice that you would give?
If you're totally new to NIH, I say to reach out to a program officer. Basically, look at the NIH webpage, find a program officer that sort of has a portfolio sort of similar to yours or close cousin adjacent. Reach out with a rough description of what you're trying to do, and set up a time to talk. Like I said, we really enjoy talking to extramural researchers. You guys have your finger on the pulse of research, and particularly the early stage investigators. Just don't be afraid to talk to us, either at annual meetings or just an email. We are your friends and we're here to help you.
Thank you. So did you have any questions, Dr. Arnett, or any other advice you wanted to give? Or
I've been to many of these workshops over my time in the academy, and I just keep coming back and keep trying. I mean, you'll just get better. Most of our graduate training has to do with scholarship, publishing in your area, and very little of it, unless you took one course. Like one course has to do with writing grants. So you're in the right place, you're doing the right thing, just keep at it, because it's a very new skill and it's a very different skill from writing, that research article. I completely, that's been my experience at NIH. By the way, my personal experience has been, the program officers have been very receptive to speaking with me, or team members as I, send in something, a specific aims page. So I've had only very positive experiences working with program officers, even if our ideas weren't relevant to their institute or if it wasn't in the right place. So I couldn't agree more, but my one encouragement is you will get rejected. That's just that. It's so much harder to get a grant than it is to publish. It's just much harder. But it is really important to keep pushing forward through that, because you'll learn every time you write a new grant. You learn something new. That's all.
All right. Well, thank you so much to our panelists, to Lyndon Joseph and Dr. Hernandez. We really appreciate your time and your wisdom. And so thank you for everybody who joined us. And remember that the Office of Research Enterprise Office. Oh, here, let me. Oh, hold on. We've got we're going to plug another workshop here.
Yeah, so again, we want to thank everyone for participating in this workshop today. I hope you've gathered some useful information that you can use to help to improve your grant writing skills and become more competitive. We want to thank our panelists, for sure, Dr. Joseph and Dr. Hernandez, for joining us today and providing some useful insights. And we have another workshop coming up. Certainly, we want to thank our presenter, Lucy Deckard, for being here today and sharing all this good information with us. Thanks to those who join on Zoom, as well as you individuals in the audience live here with us. We have a U.S. Department of Education workshop coming up on November 7th. We'll be right here in this room. And so we're looking forward to have you joining us as well. So again, thank you for participating, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.